but it's okay. So I think we joy to the world, right?
Sure.
All right, so let's start. Joy to the world, the Lord is come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare him room. And heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing. One person good. So, I don't need names, but Bob knows my favorite aunt. They came from Bismarck, North Dakota. I only have one aunt, so it's pretty easy. Most of them, besides my family, only have one aunt. So they know Aunt Mary enough word. And I said to them, what's your favorite carol? And that's why I started Joy to the World. I mean, this fall, well, actually Christmas time, I go see shut-ins and I say, what's your favorite carol? And then we start singing. I called Dad up, Dad's 86. What's your favorite carol? The Little Drummer Boy. Dad? What is this about? 1 John chapter 3. See what kind of love the Father has given to us that we should be called children of God, and so we are. The reason why the world does not know us is that it did not know Him. Beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared. We know that when He appears, we will be like Him, because we will see Him as He is. Everyone who thus hopes in Him purifies himself as He is pure. I use this as the text on Thursday for a funeral. The funeral was of a lady that I didn't really know very well. Every week for years, I've been going down to the assisted living, which used to be right next door to the church, but we moved to the church, so now it's a block away. And do devotions. And this lady has been in this assisted living for as long as anybody. I think she was in there 7 years. And she always came every Friday. I do devotions, and for whoever shows up. She hadn't been out of that place in a long time. The church that she attended had a new pastor, and never even met him. And so they asked me, will you do this funeral? Okay, I'll do the funeral. The thought, though, I really wanted to talk about is what do we know and what do we don't know? So I knew her a little bit. I mean, we never had long conversations, but she'd show up regularly and we'd do it a little bit. But that doesn't really matter, whether the pastor who preaches your funeral knows you. What really matters is that God knows you. And you tell your name, and for some reason is able to count hairs on your head, which in my case is getting easier for him every day. It's one of those deals. What do we know and what we don't know? We don't know exactly what it's going to be like when we get there. So on Wednesday, I met with the folks a day ahead of time at the assisted living and said, let's hear stories. Let's just talk about things. And then we got talking about, well, what is heaven like? What is she experiencing now? How does it work? I mean, we know we don't need these things, and we don't need the things that are behind the ear that many of us guys have, and we won't need any of these things that they all had at the assisted living. These what are they called? Chariots. Yep. You know, it's chair, right? Chariots. You know, we don't need those, but how will it all work? And what will we do? And everybody says, I want to go see my relatives when they get there. I'm like, I've kind of seen those people before, you know. Wouldn't it be amazing to sit down and have a cup of tea with King David? You know, or Paul, or that guy I'm named after, you know. I keep trying to convince the confirmation class that yes, he wrote to Timothy. And as I get older, they're believing it better and more every year. But, no, it would be nice to meet the first Timothy. And I don't know what Timothy I am, but it's way down the list. We don't know exactly what it'll be like. But we know when He appears, God says, we will be like Him. For we will see Him and be with Him forever. We're using the 3-year lectionary. Tomorrow we have the lesson about 1 Corinthians 13. You know what 1 Corinthians 13 is about, right? Love is patient, love is kind. It's really about church fights. We all know this, right? I mean, it's seriously about a fight they were having in the church. Now, why is it weddings? I have no idea. Except I often tell the bride and the groom that they want this. You know, I'm going to start talking about church fights, right? You want me to talk about fighting up here at your wedding? And the groom's like, and the bride's like, okay, well, whatever. You're the pastor, you know, whatever. So tomorrow we have 1 Corinthians 13 on the 3-year election, and it talks about now we see in a mirror dimly, then we will see. You know this verse? Then we will see face to face. Something really to look forward to. Something really to think about. We don't know a lot. We know the important fact. Jesus loves me, this I know. My assistant, our assistant pastor just changed that hymn. They had a funeral for a 94-year-old. Her whole family was there, the place was packed. And he said, I don't know if I can get away with this, but I'm going to do it. Jesus loves me, this I know, for my grandma told me so. Excellent point. What is the job of a grandparent? To love kids and to take sure they know about Jesus. And to have ice cream at any time of the day. You know, because I am a papa and that's my job. Ice cream? Oh, well, donuts? Yeah. Why not? I'm not sure how well I did as being a parent, but this grandparent thing, I think I got down. What matters the most? Knowing Jesus and being with him. So before we start everything today, we got to get to the really important thing. Jesus loves us, and because of that, we're with him forever. All right, let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, we ask that you be with us this day. Help us to think about what's coming and what we experience in the lives of others. Help us to think about how we're supposed to serve you both in life and in death. Just give us wisdom and understanding, and please bless our time together. We're really thankful today, as always, that there is joy on the earth because your Savior reigns, and because of all he's ever done for us, giving us life and hope and salvation. Please give us wisdom as we seek to do things in your way and in your time. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. You guys okay back there, or you want to come up here and sit? Because I'm going to wander. There's no real front here. In our church, we have one of these things, but I don't think I've ever used it. Have I? Well, I've used it a couple times when I wasn't healthy and I needed something to lay on, but you know, normally I'm wandering at all times. Okay, so I know some of you, I don't know all of you. What's really important is God knows all of you. I'm Tim Rainerson. I'm pastor of, well, I can put it on here, just a little advertising, Peace Lutheran Church and School in Brookings, South Dakota. I'm pastor actually of 3 churches. Between my assistant and I, we serve Zion Lutheran Church in White, Peace Lutheran Church in Brookings, and Redeemer Lutheran Church in Flanders. So all 3 churches now are kind of a tri-point, and it's really working well. We're all supporting each other and working. It's just kind of a blast. So in the morning, and of course I'm working tomorrow, in the morning my assistant and I go 2 different directions. White is 15 miles north, Flanders is a half hour south. And so far, after 2 years, we've not gone to the same place yet. After 2 years, we've not gone to the same. Now it's kind of happened. We're all both in a sense, because we're rotating always and changing. And then we're back to Brookings at 10:30 and having church at that point. Okay, that's me. What we're doing is end-of-life decision-making. The reason for it is the challenge of this first page. You know this guy by the name of M. Luther? Have you heard of him?
Yes.
The way he often signed things was M. Luther. We should familiarize ourselves with death during our lifetime, and inviting death into our presence while it's still at a distance and not on the move. At the time of dying, however, this is hazardous and useless, for then death looms large of its own accord. In that hour, we must put the thought of death out of our mind and refuse to see it, as we shall hear. The power and might of death are rooted in the fearfulness of our nature and our untimely and undue viewing and contemplating of it. When is the best time to talk about death? Before, when you're not dying. When you're dying, at that moment, what should you be talking about? life, heaven, joy to the world, what Jesus is coming. And a lot of people at that point are already kind of been around them. It's almost like they can't see, and they're seeing something we're not seeing, and their focus is different. And so Thursday was the 1-year anniversary of a young man who died in our church. He was 15 years old, had cancer for 5 years. But that last day, it's like he's just kind of, you know what I mean? Just kind of seeing and focused on things, and that's where we're at. You know, we all know it's coming. We all know what's going to happen. But at some point, it makes total sense that we're focused on it, heaven itself. We do that every day. But right now, it's also a good time to focus on how it's going to play out in our own lives, and what should be done, and how should we do things. So that's the goal, to focus on it now instead of later. I'm actually on a statewide task force that has nothing to do with the church at all. The hospital systems in this state have come together, which is wild in itself, and they all agreed to try to figure out a way to remote conversations ahead of time. Remote people just having this talk and thinking about it. So, first off, thank you all for coming and having this talk. At what age should you do this? All, right? All ages. No matter how old you are. 13? 12? Well, that wasn't too bad. That was pretty close. Whether you're that age or you're, I'm not going to pick on anybody else. Well, maybe I will. I don't know. You're a little older than that. It's a good time to talk about this and think it through. All right, let's talk about death, though. What was death like in Luther's day? They had this thing called the plague. How many people in Luther's day die of the plague?
Millions.
Okay, I got a lot of mumbling. A lot.
50%?
50% might be a little high, but it's close to that.
It lasted 3 years, didn't it?
Oh, no, it lasts,
Longer?
it keeps coming and going.
Oh, yeah.
And
But
so
it-
it's,
that particular plague.
yeah, no, it wipes out a third of Europe.
Oh, wow.
So what would a third of Europe look like? 1, 2, sorry. 3, 4, sorry. I mean, just look around the room, and a third of the people wouldn't be there anymore. How many people in this state, I don't know, you got anybody from Wyoming? Oh, good. But in this state, South Dakota, we're talking about, how many people have died of COVID? It's not 3,000 yet, right? 2 something, 20, I don't know, 300. Okay, let's say if this was a plague, how many would have died?
300.
Close to 300,000, right? We're at 800,000 per state population. So this would be, sorry, this would be about 300,000 people. It's an interesting thing to think about. How many funerals were pastors doing every week? A lot. And Luther, at one point, the elector, the guy in charge of that area, says, Luther, you need to go away and be away from this and keep yourself safe. And Luther said, no way. That's my job, is to be with people. Which burned me up when they said I couldn't go into nursing homes. But, yeah, that's just the way it is. That was a political comment for a second, wasn't it? But is it okay if I make that political comment for a second? Yeah. I mean, this whole vaccine thing, to me, was very simple. I got them as soon as I could because I was hoping to get back in the nursing homes. But that didn't change anything. I guess it does change things. I now have a member that's in really tough shape at McKinnon and Sioux Falls after an accident this week. And because I'm fully vaccinated, it's going to let me into McKinnon. I was there a couple days, but now they locked it down again. And McKinnon at this point is 2 people per day. And that's it. And then I don't count, which is good. I tried that stunt in Sioux Valley a couple times, Sanford, I'm showing my age again. And they, no, I think you're a human being, you count. So Luther's day, we got the plague. How many people die in childbirth? A lot. I exact numbers, but a lot. So moms are dying, the kids are dying, and this whole nuclear family thing is just it's a recent deal, because everybody's kind of living with aunts and uncles, and the parents are dying, and people, I always knew that when I was a kid I was going to end up in Bismarck, North Dakota, actually New Salem, if mom and dad died, because that's where my aunt and uncle were. But that isn't happening as much anymore. We have 3-4 generations in a family together. That's the normal thing. And of course, Luther had a price on his head. And everybody's out. Yeah, bounty, just like around us. Used to be, if you got coons, you know, you got a bounty, but now, not so much. That's today. Today, people don't die, most people do not die of war, famine, or plague, as they did in the past. Now, because of chronic illness, they slowly fade away from sight, from others, and from life. The world just gets smaller and smaller. And they see less and less people. And then sometimes you're like, oh, I didn't know they were still alive yet, when you see something in the obituaries. Because it's just the way that's happened. We have a complex medical system that is tough, and no one really understands it fully, including those who are part of it. But you go into a hospital and you get all the various people coming in and going, and it's hard to figure out what exactly is going on, and you're sick and you don't feel good in the first place, and now they keep coming and somebody else is telling you things. And they ask you, do you have questions? The only question you have is, when am I out of here? When are you going to let me go? That's the only book, and you just want to do whatever they want you to do because you just want out of the place. We have a lack of understanding what's going on. I had a member this past year who was down in the Valley of Texas, comes down with COVID. The reason he came down with COVID is he went and got a shot. And they think this is what happened. Not that the shock caused it, but he actually left where he was in isolation and was out in other people. And so he probably got it from that reason. He gets COVID. His wife gets it. She's perfectly fine. They're in their early 90s, and she's okay. He gets it. He ends up in the hospital. They let his wife in somewhat, but they don't know what's going on. They're in South Texas. The daughter is a neurology nurse in Sioux Falls. What actually ends up happening is the doctor in South Texas calls the neurology nurse in Sioux Falls so that she can tell her parents and translate it. You know, that's where we're at these days. It's just gotten to that point of trying to figure things out and be able to say why things are happening and not happening. We all know this, right? We probably all have stories. We have distance. We have distance that is physical from one another. Of course, there's always been emotional distance. Do families get better at time of death? Usually for the funeral. Not always, but usually for the funeral. By the time they get to the lawyer the next day, yeah, there's a whole other set of issues. Okay. We're distant from our known medical providers. So, live in Brookings, I told you that. We have our own hospital, little hospital. The clinic sits next door to the hospital. I got to spend 3 days for Thanksgiving in the hospital this year. No big deal, but we got through it. My physician, who I've known for 20 years, and is a really good guy, never came saw me, even though it's less than 200 yards. You know, I'm now under the care of a surgeon because of what I had, and then there are the hospitalists that are in charge. And in fact, the surgeon said to the hospitals when he said on them, oh, I see my adult supervision is here. But surgeons, like certain pastors, need somebody to be supervising them at all times, because you never know what they're going to do next. My own doctor, and I saw him like a week later and got to visit with him, but historically he would have been there every day. And historically means within the last 25 years that we've lived in Brookings. But that's all changed. This last one, do you know this phrase, medical assistance in dying?
Yes.
It's called MAID. It is now the term that they're using instead of physician-assisted suicide or physician-assisted death. This is the term, because it sounds really good, right? Medical assistance, they helped you come into the world, they were there, they were present, doctors were around. I don't know much about that whole process. process. We got our kids at the adoption agency, it's another way of doing it, but they're there. It's really weird, pastors don't go to that spot. We go almost everywhere else in the hospital, but that maternity ward, we are not there until everything's done. Then they hold the baby and say, isn't this baby look really cute? And you're like, no, he got squished, he looks like a lizard. You don't, hopefully the filter's working at that point, at that moment, you don't actually say that out loud. But that's where it goes. Anyway, so now they have medical assistants coming in and medical assistants going out. So in this nation, a third of our population lives under rules where they can end their own life when they choose. And it's a third of the population, it's not a third of the states, because California is involved, we got all those people. And every year, there's another state that's thinking about adding this. And in this country, all you can do is go to a physician, or maybe two, every state has a little different rules, and you ask for a prescription, and they give you pills, and then you at your own time take the pills. Now our neighbors to the north, right? Is that north? They got it? Our neighbors to the... Maybe. All right. Our neighbors in Canada live under a different set of rules. So you can make an appointment with your physician, you can see them in a hospital, or perhaps they can come to your own house, and they will give you a shot, and you can end your own life. So on Monday morning, I got a phone call from the funeral home in Brookings about this lady whose funeral I did Thursday. And after that, I got a phone call from a pastor in Canada. And this pastor I've known for a long time, he's a relative of ours. He says, I'm going to meet in another hour with a lady who's a member of our church, doesn't come real often, but a member of our church. And I've done funerals for their family in the past, and they've had challenges. She's meeting with me today, and tomorrow she has the appointment to kill herself. What do I do? And he'd already done one of the great things. He met with the rest of the clergy at his church. He's now retired, but the clergy at his church. And he met with the board elders the night before, and we're like, what are we going to do? So he and I talked about it for a while. I sent him some stuff to think about. The really cool thing is he spent 2.5 hours with her that afternoon, and she is not going to do it. And they found ways to get her help in other ways to take care of her underlying fears. But that's where we're at today, just for the record. So the nation to whatever direction, I don't really believe that's north, but okay. To the north, in Brookings you don't have this problem because every road is straight and there are no hills and it's just simple. Our neighbors to the north are living under, you can end your life at any moment. And up there, you don't even have to have a terminal illness. As long as you're dealing with, the law says something about unbearable suffering. As long as you have unbearable suffering, and that's what you say to the doc then, or the pharmacist, or the nurse practitioner, a variety of people, just like, COVID shots can be done by the same kind of list of people, can come to your house, or you can go into the hospital or go to a clinic, and then you get a shot and you end your life. That's where we're at. Now, we're not there in South Dakota, we're not there in Wyoming, but you don't have to go very far from here, and there are states that have medical assistance in dying. It starts in Oregon, been going there for over 20 years. Washington, California, Montana has it. Colorado. So I know a pastor in Colorado, I know the assistant pastor of a pastor in Colorado. And the senior pastor was asked to go when MAID was happening. Pastor, will you come while my father is going to take pills, or mother, I don't know which one, and end their life? And so the son is asking him to come. Now that pastor, from what I'm told, I know the assistant, I don't know the senior, that pastor has never gotten really over it. Because no matter which option you pick, you feel bad. Because pastors should show up when people are dying. That's part of our job description. It's like high on the list of things to do. Well, people don't normally say, hey, pastor, I'm going to sin today. You want to come join me? So how do you work this out? And if you don't go, you feel horrible. And if you do go, there's a whole other set of issues. And that's where we're at. You have questions on that? Yeah.
How would a pastor justify that to the person he's talking to?
He wouldn't justify it, he would have to go and say, this is wrong.
Yeah.
You know, I've never been in that situation, but I've been to people who are suicidal, and the solution with people who are suicidal is what? I don't let them out of my sight. You know, literally, I don't let them out of my sight until we get them some help. And help isn't necessarily me, but help is more than me. And so in several cases, I don't let them out of sight, I actually put them in the car, we head to Sioux Falls, to the Behavioral Health Hospital. But suicide's not the unforgivable sin, but on the other hand, it's still a sin, and it's wrong. What's the unforgivable sin?
Denying the Holy Spirit.
The Holy Spirit.
Yeah, my hearing's not real good, Luke. We figured that out when we were all talking at once. I got blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, which means
Well, denying him or condemning him or whatever.
the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
All right, let's put it in simpler language. And that's what Jesus said, exactly what he said. But what does that mean?
Not believing in Jesus is your Savior.
Not believing in Jesus, rejecting God somehow. If you want to tell God, forget it, God says what? No way, I'm going to keep chasing you. But at some point, there's nothing else I can do. Right? That's the unforgivable sin. We all got that, right? Or do we got questions on that? Because this is worth stopping and talking about for a second.
Well, it's still forgivable if you ask for repentance.
Do I have to ask for repentance for every sin I ever committed?
Yeah, well, that's part of the deal. We still have to be repentant for the sins we do. Oh, individually? You mean? No.
Yeah, no. So I'm driving too fast in Brookings, which right now might be 20 miles an hour, because we have this stuff you don't seem to have out here. I'm in the banana belt, I know that, but I don't live in the banana belt, I live somewhere else. So just to prove that I live somewhere else, I have a case of water always in my car, and even though I've been here for a day, it's now better, but it's not entirely right yet. Because it was, well, I don't know how many days of 10 below did we have this last week? 4 or 5 in a row. You know. All right. So I'm driving too fast for conditions, whatever that means, and I plow into a telephone pole. And my last thought at that moment is, let's go with that. Technically, I was going to say bummer dude. That's just as good. I like that one as well, all right? Am I okay with God? Yeah, because we are full-time, always sinners and saints. We are always sinners, and we are always forgiven by God. So
Speeding one of the 10 Commandments?
is speeding one of the 10 Commandments?
Yeah.
I don't
Is
know.
that a sin to speed?
Going too fast for conditions might be. Well, I was born in Spokane, and we went through Montana when I was a kid always, and they only had one rule, right? You just can't drive too fast for conditions. You don't need any more rules than that. That covers everything. But because there are idiots out there, then we have to put numbers up here. Okay. The point here is that we are always forgiven and always God's people. So is suicide the unforgivable sin? No. No, we don't know what a person believes. We don't know where they're at. We don't know all kinds of things. One year I had 3 suicide funerals in the year. Tough year. What does the pastor say at a funeral for a suicide? Same thing he says at everybody else's funeral. This person died because of sin. Jesus came for sinners. Right? Now, sometimes we have to say clearly that suicide is a sin. Because there are things in our culture today where people have forgotten that they're sins. And, oh no, it's just a lifestyle difference. No, it's a sin. It's wrong. It's not ever acceptable. But Jesus still came for people. And we leave them in the hands of the mercy of God. Okay? All right, we'll keep moving. So the goal then is to be prepared. to think about things. Now, of course, be prepared comes from Boy Scouts, all right. Can we still talk about Boy Scouts yet? Yeah. That's another whole problem. My brother's still a scoutmaster though.
Girl Scouts too, though. We said that.
Okay, I was never part of that group. I'm all in favor of that group, and the camp that I worked at, the boys were on one side and the girls were on the other side, and it would have been known to steal canoes in the middle of the night and move across, but I never actually was part of that. I heard of that happening. It is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be at all shamed, but with full courage and now as always Christ will be honored in my body, whether by life or by death. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Said by the Apostle Paul. Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the sake of the faith of the gospel. We have no idea when our death is coming, so we continue to do what God wants us to do every day, looking forward to the day when He comes and takes us home. All right? Do we have questions on that? Bottom line questions are for you to think about. How is death handled in your family and in your church? My family was not handled well. My mom believed that she never talked about dying, she wouldn't die. She died at my age. Now it's now 20-some years, 24 years ago that she died. She was 62 when she died. She had colon cancer, bad for about 3 years and dies. But she would never talk about it. In fact, we didn't know which state in the Union she wanted to be buried in. We just knew she didn't want to be buried in Missouri where they were living because she didn't like Missouri. But Dad was an executive for Synod, and that's why we were there. So my brother literally getting on the phone trying to figure out where to have Mom buried at that point. How is it handled in your family? Is it talked about? Is it worked through? Or is it avoided? How about your church? Is it talked about? Have you heard a sermon on dying lately? Went on to look at it. Have you preached on a sermon on dying lately? Sure. How to die a good death? I don't know. The first vice president of the district is here today. We should all turn and preach a sermon on dying lately? Funeral. So we have funerals where we talk about living and eternity. Where we talk about the process of people dying and what should happen and how you go through that in sermons. Maybe. Maybe not. When is ever appropriate time? With whom should we have the conversation? Exactly. We should have it with everybody, but that's the real answer right there. There are an awful lot of people that sign the document and say, I want my son, daughter, grandkid to do this, and then they never have a conversation with that person. If I can no longer make decisions for myself, you would please do this. And so I'll sign it in the lawyer's office and say, this is the way it goes. But they don't sign it in the lawyer's office, and it's just done by, do you know you all have a durable power of attorney person? Whether you've signed it or not, you all know that, right? Because by code, the state of South Dakota, every state does this, says if I were to die, who would make the decisions? Wife. If I were to die and I have kids that are not over the age of 18, who would make decisions? My wife dies at the same time. That is my parents, right? If my kids are old enough, then they're making decisions. I mean, there's a whole set of things. And in the statute, it even says uncles and a variety of people. It just goes down the list. Our lawyer said to us when we did our wills not too long ago, which was good because our kids were 20 and they weren't in there. It was time to get them in the will. He said, let's fill out the piece of paper. I said, no, it's in code. He said, yeah, I know it's in code, but just fill out the piece of paper. So we fill out the piece of paper, and we have 2 kids. So our daughter Sarah is listed first, and then our son. And when it comes to my dad and his wife, Mom died, of course you heard that, got remarried. Then it's my younger brother that's making those decisions because he lives nearby them in Michigan. Yeah.
Here at St. Paul's, we have a system where we fill out this paper with all the information that we want. And we have it in the pastor's office, so that when the time comes, he just pulls that out and all of our wishes are right on that paper.
Cool. So, did you hear her? She's saying, here at St. Paul's, Pastor Brown has a file with a bunch of people in it and has their wishes. I have a file like that, but it really is only about funerals. That's all ours does. What I'm talking about now is who makes the decisions in terms of, you go to the hospital, who gets to decide what?
Well, all that in mine,
Is
all
it?
that's in there.
Cool, that's great. Yeah. These documents, where should they be? For sure, they should not be in the lockbox, right? Beyond that, I mean, they could be a variety of places, and, you know, our lawyer has a copy of it. Given to the person making the decisions would be excellent. You know, all that makes sense. Okay,
Doesn't the hospital also have that?
they asked.
They ask if you want to do it, but that's.
They asked. So I had on, what was it, last week, 2 weeks ago? I had a test where they run a light up where they're not supposed to run a light up. You know that test? I don't have to say any more than that. It's kind of a crappy topic, you know. In my case, it was really bad because I did the whole prep and it didn't work. And then I had to do it another day, the second time. And the only reason it didn't work is, well, normally it always works, but in my case it didn't. So the hospital didn't even charge us for that first day, which is amazing. We got all ready in and we were all getting ready to go, and I said, no, I don't think so. And they said, oh, okay, come back tomorrow. Okay, anyway, they ran a light up, or they weren't supposed to run a light up, and one of the questions they asked me was, did you have a living will and is it on file? The answer is no. I have a person, and she's going to do it, and she's sitting right here. Now, I guess I could give them that piece of paper too, but I haven't. All right, let's go on, because we only got a little bit of time. I want to give you a specific case. Top of page 2. Jan, whose last name is McMahon, member of our church in Planville, the family gave information to use it. She is a 68-year-old, heavy-smoking, diabetic widow. She had an event 2 days following surgery to remove a cancerous portion of her lung. She has not regained consciousness since surgery. She's on a ventilator, feeding tubes, IVs. Jan is a lifelong member of the LCMS and involved with Lutherans for Life. Jan has 4 sons. They're all basically in their 40s. They live across the country, but they were not there for surgery because Jan's understanding of the surgeon was that it was pretty straightforward. And that's the exact quote. I mean, she told me, pretty straightforward. They expect her to go home from the hospital about 10 days to 2 weeks. So after a week, after this event happens, and that's what the doctor calls it, an event, the sons arrive at the hospital. How do they make a decision about what should be done? And that's where we're at right now, correct? This is not far-fetched, this is not, this is what happens. Does she have paperwork? I have no idea. I don't think so. We had a conversation before she went into the hospital. I don't think so. She does have a son out of the 4 who is the durable power attorney for healthcare issues. So she has that. Challenge here is there are none of them there, so I end up at the hospital going to see her every day. It was a Sioux Falls. It's 50 miles, no big deal. So I went and saw her every day, and they can't talk to me. We're under HIPAA rules these days. There's nobody actually showing up. People are calling from across the country, the 4 boys. And they finally said, no, only the boy from Wyoming that's in charge can call us. Because we just can't have everybody calling us all day long. We just don't know. And then the doctor starts talking to me quietly, not publicly, quietly, because he doesn't know her yet. I mean, met her once, but when they're having the consult to do the surgery, and we just start talking a little bit. And, you know, the boys don't know how soon to come and when to come and what to do. And they all finally show up. And we're in a room, and we're having a conversation. And I didn't know the 4 boys, because I've only been there, I don't know, 5, 6 years at that point. They're all grown. So The head elder from the church was also there, because he knew the boys, he taught biology in high school, knew them well. And so he and I and the boys and other people in this room trying to figure out what to do next. Right? I mean, these cases could go on over and over again.
Do the boys not talk to their mothers about this? If something were to happen?
Do the boys talk to their mother about if something were to happen? Well, sure, if she told them she believed in Jesus and would be in heaven forever.
No, I meant about like,
No, I know what you meant.
oh,
That's the conversation they had.
oh.
Because the mother's understanding, now, I don't know, I still to this day don't know for sure. Because none of us went with her to the hospital, to the doctor ahead of time. She went by herself. And so nobody else was there that day. And that's the second part of this. I'm 62, I own that, right? My wife's 35. Let's be clear about this. You all know what I'm talking about, right? I'm old, she's not, so anyway. But she comes with me now always, at this point already. Because I don't hear all that well, and my doctor doesn't sign. Well, I sign, but he doesn't. And so I want to make sure that I'm hearing things correctly. She went by herself. She comes and goes back, calls the boys, calls the pastor, said, yeah, I'm having this surgery, it's lung surgery. And you notice all the things going on in her life, and saying it's not that big a deal, it'll be fine. I don't know whether she actually, that's what she told us. What she actually knew and what she believed, I don't know. You know, because moms have this way of saying, it's no big deal.
The problem was she had boys, if she had a girl, that would have been there.
Okay, so now we're blaming God. Sorry. And my mom had that boys too. Yeah. So my wife showed up and there was a girl around, but that was all other. Because she didn't know what to do with girls. She knew boys. These things happen. How do you make a decision? We're still reading, right? Decision making. The answer is pray. And when you get done with that, you should pray. And when all else fails, pray. All right, so questions asked about the end of life. The first question always needs to be asked of the doctor is how soon do we have to make a decision? This is an absolute. How soon does a decision have to be made? Because sometimes they want decisions made because they need to be somewhere else soon. And it's their schedule and all that kind of stuff. But it's not their schedule, it's your schedule and the patient's schedule. How soon does this decision have to be made? Once in a while, decisions have to be made very quickly. Normally, you can take a little while.
What is a little while?
Exactly. That's a great question. What is a little while? I went to my hobby, the thing I enjoy doing, is bioethics. Bioethics is medical ethics stuff. So I go most years to a medical ethics conference where there are physicians and nurses and lawyers and one parish pastor. There are 1,000 people in this room and me. And I've never met anybody else there. They're chaplains at hospitals, but Pastor Brown and I are talking about this. Sometimes it's good to go to places where it's not the same people thinking the same thing. And I like to go to this. How do you make that decision? This guy up front said he was an intensivist, and people run intensive care units. He said, you know, if a family wants a couple days, we normally can grant that. But if they're asking for a week, we can't do that. We got a bed, we got to get filled somewhere else, or people who are sicker. But if you want to take a little time, we're okay with that. Now, the last year, that may not be the same deal. But that's where it was 4 or 5 years ago when we talked. How soon? All right, second question, what things need to be decided and in what order? Third, who do we need to talk to make a decision? Fourth, what kind of information do we need to make a decision? Fifth, or E, what does God's Word say about the situation? F, what do others in the church think about the same situation? Does that seem like a fairly good list?
Yeah.
So you gotta kind of, so whoever you pick, it would be really good if they had a little bit of sense and can start thinking this through.
Well, one thing when Randy's dad had a car accident, he did have a living will. But it says, if, what was it, if things look hopeless or something like that? How do you decide when it's your parent, what's hopeless?
Okay, so I don't know if you can all hear it, but the question is, a living will often will say, under these circumstances, we want this done. And in this particular case, we're talking about Randy's dad, right? And so if this happens, we want this. The problem with that is what?
Definition.
And
Understanding of that definition.
understanding of that definition. So I'm a highly trained professional. You guys, our church body put a lot of money into me and some other people in this room to do understanding of a text and to think it through. It's the same kind of process that happens to happen when anybody writes anything. Right? You have to know all the stuff that's going on in the text that's written there. And so often living wills have a real problem that even physicians don't really know what you're thinking about. And so when does this come into play and when does it, and when is it hopeless? It's never hopeless, because our hope is built, right? It's not us, our hope is in Jesus. And so it's never hopeless. But maybe at this point it's not beneficial. And that's a different question. It may not be something that's actually going to help the person. It may be something that's just going to cause more trouble. So let's take a specific example. DNR. DNR stands for? Well, we got this one. Okay. When is it helpful? When somebody can't, heart's going on a rhythm, right? And we all got that. That's when it's helpful. When is it not helpful? What group of people does it not work on?
Family.
Well, I mean, you can do it on your family member. Yeah. It does not work on people who are not very big anymore and they're elderly. Primarily women, because guys have all died before this. That's another whole issue. But, I mean, often when you go in a nursing home, they'll say, do you want this? What is the population of people who have, and what's the percentage of people who have CPR who are in nursing homes and they actually does them any good?
CPR is 0.
You know this number? It's like less than 1%. Because what happens in CPR? It crushes lungs, it crushes the ribs. You know, what it often leads to is pneumonia, all kinds of other complications. It just doesn't work. And so why would you have full code on somebody that if they did that on them, it would just make them horrible in the midst of something that's not going to work anyway? That's the question about beneficial. Not the question of hope. It's the question of beneficial. Is it okay to have a DNR? Depends on who you are, right? Can I put a DNR on me? Well, number one, if I'm in a car accident, they would ignore it. They just go after it, right? Because I'm not of that population and group and all kinds of things. So Monday morning was an interesting morning. I told you already, right? I got a phone call about a funeral of someone I sort of know. I got a phone call from a guy in Canada about end-of-life issues, MAID stuff. And I got a phone call from somebody who was at an accident that involved our members. And the one member died in the accident, and the other member they took immediately to Sioux Falls to start surgery. And she's been through 4 surgeries this week. The first 2 bizarre to me. They took her to McKinnon. You guys all know how Sioux Falls works, the 2 big hospitals. And they took her to McKinnon because Slandrew is a McKinnon community, I mean a Vera community. They went down there. Took her to there. They loaded her, got her up, got her stabilized. Then they put her back in the ambulance, took her to the heart hospital, was on the other end of town. Did some really important surgeries, brought her back, got her stabilized. Then they did a third surgery, it started at 8 o'clock at night, and went till about midnight. And I stayed for all that, and then she was stabilized that day. And then 2 days later, they did more surgery, and Monday they're gonna do more surgery. You know, horrible car accident. They didn't ask anybody, they just did it. Because there's nobody to ask. You know, there are people, but in a car accident like that, they took them half the day to find the people. Or a couple hours to find the people to get there to ask. So sometimes you just go forward because that's what we gotta do. Those are the quick decisions. That's not what we're really talking about. That just needs to happen. Please.
How about if someone is choking, would that DNR go with that? Or would
Someone's choking, if he's choking, what am I gonna do?
Well, yeah.
I'm gonna go over, I'm not gonna ask you, do you have a DNR? I can't even ask him, right? Well, nursing home's a different issue. If they're choking, they're gonna go after it.
Okay.
Yeah, they're gonna try whatever they can to do it. My grandmother, my second grandmother, Grandpa had, my first grandmother died of diabetes, she was like 60. Grandpa got remarried again, because there were plenty of women in his age group that got remarried again. His second wife was in a restaurant in Denver, they were eating together, and the choking happens. And they try Heimlich, and she dies a week later. No, they'll go after that one immediately. No, it's not the same. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. They're not dead yet, we're just doing what we can to help them at that point. They're not really dead yet when they're resuscitating them, but
But if you are visibly wearing a DNR, they have to honor them, right?
right, I don't know about the choking issue. That's whether they're gonna get the paddles out and do the whole thing.
Oh, okay. So that
Yeah,
doesn't.
that whole thing.
Okay.
It's not about whether you got something in your airway, or they're gonna do, they're still gonna care for you and do all the normal
Most
stuff.
of the nurses and the workers there now.
You know, all the nursing home, they'll do all the regular stuff. They just won't get the paddles out, they won't do compression, they won't do, that's me.
How do they determine when to use hospice?
Okay, we haven't gotten to hospice yet.
Okay.
All right. Hospice, hospice is a really good thing. What's the difference between regular medical care and hospice?
Morphine.
Okay, all right. Do you people not have hands? What? It's comfort care. Yes.
It's morphine.
It can be morphine. Well, the morphine's used for people that aren't on hospice. It's both hand. You know, that's just, you said morphine, right?
It's the difference, yeah, because they don't usually give you morphine in a regular hospital.
Oh, no, they can.
Yeah, they can.
Yeah, no, I'm related to somebody by marriage who got it. And she's not, I have to remember that she shouldn't have that because they didn't go well. And she's in the room. I'm not pointing her out yet, right? But she's in the room. And so, yeah, no, morphine is either way. Morphine is used a lot in end-of-life issues.
It is.
You're correct about that. What else? Hospice.
Getting back to the DNR, I mean, personal experience, pull a body out of a burning car, and you just lay the body down on the side of the road. Do you decide to resuscitate so they don't look like they're breathing, or what do you do?
Okay, did you all get this question?
Yeah.
This is the firefighter question, the EMT question, the person that comes on the accident question.
There was no EMTs there on scene yet, nothing, just a whole bunch of bystanders.
There's a person that they pull out of a car, doesn't seem to be breathing, doesn't have a pulse, what do? You immediately start CPR. I mean, you can't, yeah, that's really what you do is you can't. This accident, the accident happened on Monday on I-29. What happened was one of our people showed up right after the accident, before anybody's there. And she hadn't been a nurse, and so she starts helping.
That's why we look for a nurse.
And I'm on the fire department in Brookings, and we're just, you know, you go do what you can. Right? And that's, we're in this together.
I've heard of
And
people.
in Flandreau, it took a half hour to get the ambulance out to the interstate. By the time you get the people, get them there and stuff like that, so it takes a while.
I've heard of people being sued because they help somebody.
We don't worry about lawsuits.
Yeah.
We're the church, right? No,
Well, yeah.
let's not get into the legal issues. Let's just back up and say, we don't care about lawsuits, we care about people.
Yes.
And so we just go do what we can, and if they're gonna sue us, I don't have much assets anyway. No big deal.
We have good spirits in law.
Yeah, which I hate the name of that, because the Good Samaritan has nothing to do with it.
But if you try, they can't say what you did.
I don't want us to, so what I'm trying to do is stay away from legal issues. I'm not a lawyer, I do not play a lawyer on TV. I have no, so I'm trying to stay out of, and just keep us to what we know. So you're absolutely correct. But it doesn't matter. If somebody's there, we do what we can.
You had asked about hospice, we had also some more identifications with family,
Okay, so
more than the hospital.
the basic definition of hospice versus regular care is really simple. The goal is whether you're curing or only caring. At some point, there's no cure possible. And when you move into hospice care, we're not trying to cure anything at this point. We're just trying to care for people. Now, yeah, it talks about end-life issues. It sometimes is using morphine that's titrated. It does all kinds of other things. But all hospice really is we've now moved to a point where we can't cure. So do we need to do blood pressure checks every hour? No, that's silly. We aren't doing that. Do we need to take temperature all the time? Yeah, maybe once in a while, but not all the time. Do we need to do the annoying things they do to you in the hospital? No. I'm in the hospital, I'm in pain, it's the middle of the night, the nurse is there. Can I have a couple Tylenol? Sure, fine. She comes back 3 hours later because I'm getting antibiotics. 3.5 hours later. Can I have a couple Tylenol, the pain's coming back? No, you cannot. Because it's not been 4 hours. Hospice, they don't mess around like that. The interesting thing is they would have given me at that point morphine, they would have given me hydrocodone, but they could not give me Tylenol. Because it had been 4 hours. I had to wait 4 hours. And then when she came back at the 4-hour mark, I said, all right, can I have one every 2 hours? Just to kind of level this out? No, the doctor ordered 2 every 4 hours. All that nonsense is gone. And actually the nurses would say it's nonsense too. I mean, she fully got that it was silly, but it's the rule, I gotta live by the rule. That's hospice. Okay, you got more questions on that? Who should be helping the hospice? All of us. We should be there. Because family gets it, but they get tired. And if you've been with families that have gone through this, if you've got a really good family that is strong and they can take turns and work it out, great. But families have their own set of challenges. So who should be stepping up? Church people, right? At least to go sit for a while so they can go get groceries or something, or play pinochle, or something. Do we play pinochle? Are we good with pinochle? We're good with pinochle, right? I just want to see what kind of Lutheran crowd this is. There's a lot of trouble with this. Exactly. So I had a family in Brookings. The wife was an active member of the church, the husband not so much. But both parents are dying slowly, and it's taking a while. And they have a daughter in Phoenix and a daughter in Denver, and they have a daughter in Brookings. And the daughter in Brookings isn't so helpful. It's just the way she's always been. She isn't so helpful. So the daughter in Phoenix and the daughter in Denver took turns, and they'd fly up and they'd be there for a month, and then the other one fly in, and that went on for like 4 years. And they did it because it's mom first, and then it's dad, and no, it's dad first, and it was mom. And it just goes on. At one point, they finally said, no, we're going to take her to our house in Colorado, which I didn't like because I couldn't see her anymore. But Pastor's okay, we got church, she'll come. And you'll do the funeral yet. And I could call her on the phone, but it just made more sense to not fly to Brookings. Because you can't fly to Brookings these days. unless you own a plane and you're the governor, but that's another issue. Oh, no, that was twice already, politics. Yeah, please.
How do they decide whether, because I was never told, they did our hospice at my home, and I would have to call, like, one night, I had to call at 4 o'clock in the morning for them to come and assist me.
Yep.
But how do they decide whether they go to like a hospital? Are there such things or what?
In Sioux Falls. I don't know about this direction. We don't have any Brookings.
It was in Texas.
Well, in Texas. Depends on where you're at. And so in Brookings, the only way you can do hospice at this moment is they bring the bed to your house and the family helps you. Or you're in the nursing home and there's a for-pay hospice association that comes out of Sioux Falls and helps the nursing home. Marshall, Minnesota, which is just across the border from us an hour, has its own community-based hospice place. And they've had it for 30 years. And the community put up a building for a hospice, and everybody in town helps with it, and they raise money for it all the time, and it's a service of that community. But most places in this state that I know of don't have that. Our hospital in Brookings, they added up. We don't belong to Avera or to Sanford or Monument. We're separate from everybody. And they added on a $60 million addition to our hospital. The old OB rooms upstairs, they're talking about turning it into hospice, but they haven't got it done yet. Because they're still trying to figure out the funding model and all that kind of stuff. That's the way it is. She was over, I'll get back.
Okay, sometimes when one of us would go to visit someone, their family maybe doesn't reassure them of their baptism and God's love for them and that God is with them. And us as Christians, we can reassure that person, you know, and pray with them, and we can sing hymns with them.
Okay, let's just talk. Okay, go for it first.
I was going to say with hospice, you kind of got to be careful what their basic philosophy is. Because we put my mom on hospice when they took her off all her meds. They neglected to give her a bath or anything else because she was in the nursing home and they're supposed to do it. And nobody did it. Their mother said, no, the nursing home.
Okay, so, yeah, this happens with every issue in the medical field. You name it, happens. Are you getting the quality of care that you should be getting? We always got to advocate for our families. We always got to stand up and say, no, this is not going to happen. We're going to do, because hospice should be doing basic, somebody in that time period should be doing basic care. We never let basic care go away, whatever that may be. And I can't speak to other communities. I know Brookings really well. In Brookings, we have people who do home health, would come out and do the baths, would do a variety of things. Right now, it's a little trouble because you can't find people to do anything. And I'm not blaming anybody. It's just because of what we've just been through, an awful lot of people in my age group retired, and there aren't people to replace them. And so finding people for jobs is just hard, especially in anything that looks like teaching or social work. So we run an early childhood center in our building. At one point we had 150 kids a day. We can't do that anymore because we can't get help. That's just the way it is. Okay. Just want to make it clear, this is a way of thinking about decision making. But this next paragraph. After prayer, conversation with the medical people, prayer, discussion with others in the church, prayer, discussion with the family, prayer, before with the decision, we aren't really making a decision. We need to say that, right? We don't ever really make decisions. God does. And that's what we keep saying. Because God is in charge, and He will always do what is the best in His eyes for His people. And if later we think we made a wrong decision, God forgives and loves us always. So if we think we made a wrong, do you make wrong decisions? As you drive out of the dealer's lot, trying to think, was that really a good idea? You make wrong decisions when it comes to what you're eating. Hey, Pastor, you're a boy. How is that possible? You know, that little kid that day, I don't know. And he actually said that. And then I had a little girl. Hey, Pastor, you're a pink. No, girls wear pink. No, I wear pink. face. You know, it just works. We're in this together. And we make wrong decisions. And we ask that God would forgive us. And even in this realm, people look back and say, should I have done something else? And the answer is, God only knows. And God forgives. Right? We don't really make decisions. What's the old saying? Man proposes. You know this one? God disposes. Man proposes, God disposes. We make suggestions. Oh Lord, if it would be possible, take this cup away from me. We make suggestions. And he's one of we, right? He has flesh and bones just like we do. We make a suggestion and say, there's a better way of doing this. I'd like to see the better way. But, what did he say?
Not my will,
Not
but
my
thine be
will,
done.
not my will, but yours.
This is Jesus. Let alone all the rest of us. Okay. Questions on that? You good? Yeah, I know. It's like 10 after 10. We should stretch for a minute, right? We should make a good decision. Donuts in the morning are a good decision. But we're going to take 5 minutes. Updated principles. 1979, the CTCR, the Commission on Theology and Church Relations, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, came up with some principles about how to make decisions. You can look this up on a new thing created by Al Gore called the Internet. You can go to a website called lcms.org. How hard is that? You can look up this document. There are like 12 things in there. Somebody put this into 6. I did this. Put this into 6 basic principles. 1, every person is valuable in the sight of God. Therefore, every person deserves the best possible care throughout their lives and at the time of their death. 2, God will heal all disease. The only question is location. 3, God alone knows the number of a person's days. He has the sole power to create and end life. Therefore, euthanasia is against God's will. This includes any form of medical assistance in dying. 4, we're called to bear one another's burdens. So we're in this together. Just one little quick thing. How many hospitals in this country were started by church people? All. Almost all. Why are the church people not there anymore? Do we get kicked out or do we leave on our own accord?
Yes. Both.
Both. But what is our job? Does Jesus care about people who are sick? If you want to do something, just read the Gospel of Mark and write down everything that talks about sick people. You'll have pages and pages and pages of stuff. Are we supposed to be helping those who are sick?
Yes.
That's not a question. We are supposed to be helping people in this point. 5, death is not part of life, but its opposite. It was brought into the world because of man's sin. We are not to seek death, nor are we to seek continual life as the highest good. Did you catch that one? We're not to seek death, nor are we to say we're supposed to live forever here. A Christian is free to die in the confidence of the resurrection. Therefore, one can reject or stop treatments that are no longer beneficial for the person. Let's just take another one. There it is over there. How long can you go without this stuff?
7 days.
Oh yeah, no, isn't that great how solid it gets? 10 below. And we're 3 days off of it, it's still been like this. A long time. It depends on where you're at in life, right? And what's going on. 3 days is not correct. I mean, you can go quite a while. I just went for a while because, they kept giving me water, but Thanksgiving Day, I'm in the hospital. I get clear liquids. I didn't want that, Joe. Nope. I'm just doing water. That's all I'm going to do. Because that's how I am. What? No. Did not. But I was perhaps the most thankful I ever met. and you're laying in a hospital room. Thankful for what God has given you. All right, so you can stop or reject treatments. We used to, Luke's wife even said, you need to continue to provide nutrition and hydration throughout life. Because even a guy my size, if you don't give me water and hydration and food, I'm going to die at some point. Now, you skinny people, it's going to happen to you quicker, but us, it's going to last a little longer. But it's still going to happen. That's now, we don't talk that way at all. When do you don't give water to people? When they can't use it anymore.
When they can't swallow.
Well, swallowing is one thing, but one, even to get rid of the IVs, if their kidneys are not working, if their bladder is not working, if it's not, those systems aren't working, the heart's not working well enough to pump it all off. At some point, if you keep giving water, what happens? They drown. So it is perfectly okay at some point to say, enough. This just isn't working anymore. They're just filling up with fluid. And so I had a lady in Flandreau, I don't like you, don't like Flandreau, but lady in Flandreau, who was in the hospital in Bell Rapids for about 40 days, and they gave her nothing. But she had some sort of an event, stroke kind of thing. She was laying in a body, in a bed. She has no need of calories. I mean, she's not putting any calories out. Sometimes families want, they need to eat. Well, maybe they don't need to eat. Maybe they've got enough reserves that are okay. But at some point, enough is enough. And if you keep giving more water, they're just going to fill up, and they're going to have a whole different set of problems. 6, we make decisions based on the best information that can be gathered in consultation with the other members of the body of Christ. May God's will be done. We always depend on the strength and forgiveness of the Lord. Moving on. Page 3, the world solution. In medicine, is there a thus saith the Lord? Here we got, people stand up front and they say, thus saith the Lord, and we all say, okay, God said it, we do it. Is there a thus saith the Lord in medicine? Not anymore. They have to make a decision, and they have to make a decision somehow, but they don't have a common faith that they can base this on. And that's just reality, right? And has it always been this way? Yes. How many Christians were there when Paul writes to Corinth? There are roughly 50 in a town of like 100,000. And it's not 50 Missouri Synod and 50 ELC. There are 50. Which is really interesting because they're having a church fight. How many Christians does it take to have a church fight? I have one with myself often, so the good that I want to do, I don't do. The evil I try to, it's all, you want. So the way they decide things today, and this is medical ethics, is done by a thing called principalism. And principalism is this. There are 4 basic principles. The first is autonomy. Autonomy means self-rule. I make my own decisions. Auto means self, that's like an automobile. An automobile, you get around. Nomos means rule. I make the decisions. That's a basic principle. The doctor doesn't make the decisions, the nurse doesn't make decisions, the patient gets to make the decisions. Second principle is beneficence, which means beneficial, but you cannot use the word in the definition of the word. That is a 3rd grade rule. Right? You've got to have a different word. Helpful?
Do what is good.
Do what is good. Excellent. Do all that's correct. Do what is good. What's the problem in medicine with what is good? We don't know. Right? The doctor says to you, let's try this. And why is that?
Because it's called a practice.
And why is it? Right. And why don't they know?
Each person is different.
Psalm 139, which says, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. If you gave every last one of us the same skill at this moment, would it have the same impact? No, of course not. On the commercials, they even say, it may cause, and they have all these lists of stuff, right? Diarrhea is always on there. Can I say diarrhea in here? Yeah. And what's also on that list, if you look carefully? Death. I mean, somebody's going to die of this stuff. Death could happen. So we give the same, well, now he's gonna go down that road, isn't he? Give the same shot to everybody in this room, will it have the same impact? No. I mean, and that's because, I'm not knocking them in any sense, it's because we are fearfully and wonderfully made. My DNA is different than everybody else's, thankfully. And yours is different than mine. And even if you have twins, they're different. Right? And I have siblings, and they are different. And we'll just leave it at that. So I got part of Dad's problems, my brother got a different set of Dad's problems, my other brother got a different set of Dad's problems. We don't have the same. So I have a brother who is, just had to resign from ministry. He's 60 years old. We just went down to see him. He had quit because he'd had prostate cancer now for 12 years, and it's moving into his bones. He's different than I am, even though we're brothers, right? We are fearfully and wonderfully made. We do not know what the best thing to do is for people. How about the next word, non-maleficence? This is the basic principle, goes all the way back to Hippocrates. Do no harm. Excellent. Do no harm. Do we know what harm is? Often we do. So you go to a pharmacist, they say, you cannot have that drug with that drug. But the doctor told me to. Well, don't go to 15 doctors is his next line. We do know what harm is sometimes. The last one is justice. Justice is we should treat everybody fairly and equally. So often the question is asked, the doctor, what would you do with your mother in this case? And the best of the doctors say, I'm not you. I'm not part of your family. We may make decisions in different ways than you do. I may have a different point of view of things. And so what I would do and what you would do are not the same thing. That's the best of it. But we want to treat everybody fairly. Okay, so that's how they make decisions. They would look like a case like Jan. So Jan, that case earlier, had no sons, or at least we didn't know if she had any sons. And there would be a committee in the hospital of people who would get together and make decisions. And they would use these 4 basic principles and try to go off one another. They would also use this phrase quality of life. What kind of quality of life do they have? What would their quality of life be if they had this procedure or didn't have this procedure or any of those kind of things? Sometimes they would go to, and I think she already said it, what does their paperwork say? And so paperwork was designed so that it couldn't talk for you. And there are 2 basic forms. One form is durable power of attorney for healthcare issues. Any lawyer that I ever talked to said this is the one that's important. Because the circumstances are always changing, you need to have a person who can make the decisions for you. The second one is a little iffy because, and we've already talked about, how do you know at this point whether it'll kick in? You know, and what will happen and that kind of stuff. So the further you get into life and the more sick you are, maybe it makes more sense. But if you were able here to make it today, we're not dealing with DNR for any of you. You're able to walk around and do things. And I'm a firefighter. We would immediately, if we saw you, take care of it. I'm the chaplain for the fire department. Which means I go talk to people, which I do all day long, and then if people need it, then I pull hoses like anybody else. Okay, we got that? Now, your lawyer our lawyer's good. Can you be a Christian and a lawyer? The answer is absolutely. Absolutely. And we need their help just like we need every other professional's help. Can you be a Christian and a... No, we're not going down that. And you notice I didn't even answer that. What are the issues? DNRs, of course, we talked about, artificial integration, nutrition, we talked about. You can actually now put in a document that says allow natural death. And if your lawyer hasn't seen this yet, it comes out of Fort Wayne from the Lutheran Hospital. You can look up on the internet this thing called allow natural death and say, this is what I want. And then it isn't, we're taking away certain things, it's a much more positive way of saying, if I'm in this situation and you want to write this document, this is what I'd like to see. Just let God do what God does.
Is that available or being used through software?
I have no idea. I'm not a lawyer, I don't play a lawyer on TV. I've been down that road. No. I mean, that's what people say to the doctors, but, yeah. This next one is a little bit of a challenge, voluntary stopping eating and drinking. Can you stop eating or drinking at any point? No, I can't. I mean, it's pretty clear. You know, especially if donuts are in the room, it's just not gonna happen. But there are people who can do this, I guess. What this is actually starting is New York State. New York State has a law that they're proposing. Minnesota is also looking at it, where if you're at a certain level in Alzheimer's and you've gotten to a point where you can't do something, then don't feed me anymore. So the voluntary part is that you make this decision ahead of time. Later on, then they're going to enforce it. And the reason for it is because if you're in a nursing home, they have to feed you. And so they're trying to get this document so you don't have to be fed anymore. This is problematic. This is problematic. We're moving now towards causing our own death in the conversations. So that one's being talked about in a lot of places, but it's a little problematic. The real problem is, do I at 62 know what I want at 82? And I may have a bias, of all kinds of biases. Maybe my bias is never to be in a nursing home. Have you known people who got to the nursing home and got better? I know all kinds of people that way, because they got regular meals, they got medicines on time, they got good care, they were by themselves, they got much better.
Years ago.
Do I get to decide whether I end up in a nursing home someday or not? Why not even my family? Why? This may be God. This may be what I need. And I shouldn't be the one saying up front, no, I don't want whatever the list is. Because I am not in charge. And you're all thankful for that. Because me being in charge, it's craziness. It's just wild. It just keeps going. It's, you know, he doesn't really believe in rules at all. I believe in one rule, not two. Love God, love your neighbor. Beyond that, it's kind of iffy. And the details. We only one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. The rest of them are just explanations of it. They're details. My dad always said, if you can keep the first one, we don't need the other 9. I had a professor one time said, if you didn't do the last 2, you wouldn't have any trouble at all. The last 2 are the motivation clause. Don't covet, because coveting then leads you into all the rest of the sins. And if I don't covet, then I remember God is God and I am not. Which I think there was a pastor once who said that here.
Pastor.
On more than one occasion. Okay, medical assistant, we got all that. We won't go through Oscar. You can read Oscar yourself. Oscar is not the grouch. But he got grouchy. Well, no, we better go through it quick. Oscar was a vegan for most of his life. He gets Alzheimer's. He's put in assisted living. As per his habits, he's given vegan meals. One day, by mistake, he gets a portion of meatballs, potatoes, brown sauce, and lingonberries. Do you know where this is? Sweden, actually, but close. Yes, exactly. Lingonberries. It was intended for the next door neighbor, the guy at the table with him. He enjoyed it so much, and the next meal, noticed that the first time, different food was served to everybody else than him. The caseworkers persuaded him to eat his vegan meal, but the next day he said, no way, I'm not eating this special muck that's only for me. Beef is what's for dinner. His key worker discussed the situation with his wife, who in no uncertain terms expressly forbade the staff to give him anything but vegan food. She insisted it was against his and her conviction to eat meat or warmed over dead body parts, as she put it. Really? The staff tried to comply, but encountered vociferous protest at every meal from the man, who sometimes with triumph and great delight managed to appropriate food left over by somebody else. Isn't that great? The word appropriate here. That's the most important part. The head of the unit and the staff were not sure how to do this. Should they allow him to eat meat? What should they tell the wife? This is a case that is in the records. And I heard this at an ethics conference. And, you know, not Christians necessarily, not non-Christians, ethics conference, full room filled with people, and the physician up front that's leading this said, he got to eat meat, and of course that's better. And there are people in this room that are going, And I'm like, well, yeah, because beef is what for dinner. On pork, right? Chicken. Yeah, chicken. You know, we raise the best beef and pork in the world. Why would we eat anything else? Chicken, you gotta go to Arkansas to get that. Anyway, what does the unit want to do? What do the people who are working there want to do? Take care of him and satisfy him and they don't want him mad. Because the more he's mad, the more he's a problem for them. Right? They want people who are cooperative, not people who are appropriating food from other people. And so their goal is, let's just feed the guy. The wife's upset. What do they end up doing?
Feeding the guy.
The Swedish commission that went through this whole thing, and it was Sweden, and it's meatballs, I got it. The Swedish commission went through the whole thing, said, the man can make decisions, yet let him make decisions. That's the problem with living wills. I don't want this as a 60-year-old for my 80-year-old self. Well, how in the world do you know what you want at 80? And a lot of people say, I never want this, and there are all kinds of people wandering around with whatever that is right now, doing perfectly fine. I don't want this means I don't want this by myself. You know, whatever my disability may be, I want people with me. But I don't get to pick, do I? Why was I born in Spokane?
Because your parents lived there.
I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, my parents lived there, but why was I born there, in that family? Why was I not born in Sri Lanka? Or in Woonsocket? Yes. You know, I just like to say that word every so often, right? Woonsocket. It's like Ulaanbaatar. You just got to say it just good. Or Jehoshaphat. It's just kind of fun to say once in a while. All right. Next page. The church's solution. Page 4. Do we believe in autonomy? No. What do we call autonomy in the church? Even smaller. We have a word for it. That's only 3 letters. Starts with an S, ends with an N. There's an I in between, and you know, all these pastors. It's the big I in the middle, right? Am I an autonomous being? No. In case I forget, it's right there. And should husbands ever forget they're autonomous beings? No. Right? Guys should never do this. They should never forget they're autonomous beings. We are married. Correct? Because if you forget you're married, that could cause you a few troubles down the road. All kinds of problems and all kinds of things. So I'm married. I'm not autonomous. I'm not autonomous, I'm a father. By God's grace through adoption, I'm a father. What's even cooler these days is that some people call me Papa. 3 people, and I'll show you pictures later if you need to. Although I'm not grandma, I don't have thousands of pictures. I only got like 3 of the 3 kids. I'm also a son. My father is still living. I'm also a member of a community, Peace Lutheran Church and School. I'm proud of it, I'll wear it, I'll just tell everybody I'm part of it. I'm part of another community. Zion Lutheran Church in White, another community. Redeemer Lutheran Church in Flanders. What I do has an impact on anybody else. But any part of that community, if they do things, has an impact on all the rest. We do not believe in autonomy. Adam forgot who he was. And because of that, we're in trouble. And you notice who I picked on? Adam. Because where was Adam when Eve was having a conversation with the serpent? Right there. And he was the weak, silent type. He wasn't a strong silent, he was the weak, silent type, and said, okay, whatever. What could he have done? He could have just simply said, I don't know. God's walking through at 3 o'clock this afternoon like he does every other day. Let's just ask him. I mean, that's all he had to do. He didn't have to have a fight with his wife. All he had to do was say, no, I don't think it's a good idea. Let's just wait a few hours and ask the guy in charge. But he didn't do that. He's the weak one. And Scripture is clear. Who was guilty? Adam. Adam. All right, so we're not into that. Are we into quality of life? It is not our phrase. It is not our phrase. It does not come from the church. It comes from the people who want to start saying you can end your own life because you don't have any quality anymore. There's a person laying in bed that needs to be feeded to have quality of life. Yes, God gave them that quality. Are they important? Absolutely. Somebody that's in a vegetative state. Should we even use that phrase? No, they're not a vegetable. They're a human being. God created them. Right? It's not some have more quality and some have less. We're all in this together. Now, there's no other good phrase at this point to talk about when I have this or that or the other. Can I say, God, if I don't remember anymore, I want out of here? Sure, you can make that suggestion. But it's a suggestion, right? It's not a, I do it. It's just a suggestion. Lord, I don't want to have, okay, that's fine. Lord, I don't want to be the second one. I would rather be the first one. Does that make sense? I mean, you can make any of the suggestions you want, but you're not in charge. And the day we think we're in charge, when humanity's in charge, the things get fixed. Or they go down more quickly. Okay. So what we're into is to seek God's will. And the third petition is, thy will be done. How is that different than thy kingdom come? How is it different than hallowed be thy name? The same idea, right? God's in charge. How is it different than deliver us from evil at the end? No, God's in charge. So we don't want to separate thy will be done from deliver us from evil. Luther at one point writes on this issue and says, it's amazing how many people only want to do the last petition. And if God doesn't do the last petition, then they don't want to do anything else. But maybe God put it last for a reason. Because what we really want is His name to be hallowed, His kingdom to come, His will to be done. Correct? We do prayer requests in church. We did it because when we started, when I got peace, Ruth and I got peace, there were 20 people. It didn't make sense to call the church office for 20 people. So we started doing prayer requests in church. We go up there. We're now 150 people in church every Sunday. We still do this. It's amazing how many people walk in for the first time in church and they put up their hand and they'll ask for a request. What are all the requests that we get? Deliver us from evil. Right? My mom's sick, my dad's sick, my cousin, these people are mourning, and it's perfectly fine. And it's great. It's fine to ask these things. But they're suggestions. Because we still believe God's will be done. Okay. What we're really into is this next line, the best interest standard. This is a medical term, best interest standard. The simplest way to explain it is this. When Sarah, our daughter, was, I don't know, 10, 12, something, the dentist said, you need to go see the orthodontist and we need to do something to her mouth. Did we have a conversation with her about whether that's a good idea?
No.
Sure, absolutely. Did it matter whether we had a conversation? No, she's still getting it. Right? I mean, we had a conversation with her and we talked about it. She's 10, 11, or I don't know, somewhere in that ballpark. Right, or is she older than that? I don't know.
7.
7? Oh, she's
That was
7.
what Laura got, she was 7.
Oh, yeah, 7, okay. Yeah. Now she's been, you know who she is now. She also, she had a tooth was going straight out horizontal. We had to deal with that and you take care of it. Do we have conversations? Sure, but did it matter? No, she's still getting it done. Because we're her parents and it's our job to do what's best for her. Someday, Sarah knows this fully, it's her job to do what is best for me. Well, it's his job first, but it's her job after that. And what is best for me? And not put me in a nursing home near a golf course. Because I'll be out of that building, wandering around again, like I do all the time. So what is best for me? I'm not telling her. I'm just, because I don't know. I don't know what's best for me now. You do what is best in the situation. Not, I want, and all this does is takes guilt away a little bit. And says, I trust you. I know you're important. You're going to do the right thing. You just do the right thing. Knowing two statements. That's the next part, 5. Here's the two statements. God is present and heals through the hands of doctors and nurses. We are not Christian scientists. We fully believe in God working through medicine. Yet, I'm but a stranger here. Heaven is my home. Now, figuring out what this particular decision has to be done in the midst of that, between those two poles, is a little hard. But to tell the durable power of attorney, whoever that may be, I need to know two things. I'm in favor of medicine, but medicine's not going to save me. I've already been saved by the blood of Jesus. You make the decisions as you see fit. And I'm not trying to hold you anything. So now they don't have to say, what did mom want? Well, mom tends to know what they want. They know things. What did dad want? Did dads know anything? No. Right? Every comedy that's been on TV is about dads who don't know anything. And why is it funny? Because it's true. How's that? All the dads in the room are going. You didn't have to say it. Well, I'm not that old. But okay, but even in that one, from what I remember reruns, did he know everything? Yeah. I just remember Bill Cosby and, well, there's another no problem. Everyone loves Raymond, and, you know, the list just goes down, right? Tim Allen, oh yes. In both the Tim Allen shows, where he had boys and now he has girls. Tim Allen's from Michigan.
But that's not really scriptural.
No, probably not. Father is the head of the household, but it does not mean that he knows everything. Father as the head of the household means he's responsible for everything. And when I work with young couples, we talk about this all the time. It's not that that guy knows anything, but God's holding him accountable. So whose job is it to make sure the kids show up in church? Dad's. Whose job is it to say, I'm sorry first? Dads, husbands. As Jesus, we're supposed to be like Jesus, and Jesus is the one who always seeks us out and always looks for us and always doing it. And what are women supposed to be like? The church. Right? I mean, remember the passage clearly says the church. So it doesn't mean they know everything. It means they're held accountable. Just like Adam was held accountable when he didn't know nothing. And God is in trouble. Okay. Just want to get that clear. So sometimes pastors and other people are kind of wishy-washy. This is not wishy-washy. This is not promoting an issue that we should be telling our family, do what's in my best interest, and here are two statements about my best interest. The next thing is, when should you have a conversation about this? As soon as possible. Here's a way of doing it. The 5 questions. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. I guess there's 6. All right? Here's just a way of doing it. When should you do it? You notice that it says in there, the day after Thanksgiving. It's not a Christian thing at all, but I mean, the world is promoting, I mean, our nation's promoting, the day after the feast, you gather the family together and say, here's where I'm at. Now, who should do this? Maybe the grandparents, great-grandparents who were there are going to say, here's where I'm at. But maybe it's even better if the 50-year-olds or 60-year-olds say, this is where we've talked about, and that might lead the older generation into thinking about it. Well, maybe it's better that the 20-year-olds, who are great-grandchildren of all this, said, we know we might be in an accident someday, so we're going to talk about it now. And here's where we're at, doing our best interest, medicine, I'm but a stranger here. Doesn't matter who it is. And how do you do it? You blame me. I went to some conference and some wacko guy from some other side of the state, why do people live on that side of the state anyway? The whole thing goes on, and then he said, but I need to do this. And so blame me, I don't care. Just get her done, as that guy from Nebraska says. Last thing on here is a creed. That is the statement of what we believe towards this. We are not our own, we belong to Christ. We've been through death and resurrection once before in baptism. We're never alone. God is always with us. He is greater than all things. His Son has destroyed the power of darkness. In him we have life because he died for us. Nothing can separate us from him, not even death. Therefore, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? The sting of death is sin, the power of sin is law. But thanks be to God, who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. You notice in here there's a statement of faith you can give to your family. Now, earlier there was a statement of principles you could give to your family. And there's in here a decision-making guide you can give to your family. The goal of this is you can actually use it yourself. But if you have questions, my email's on there. Before that, you get your pastor. And we can work through that. So the goal is to give you something in your hands you could pass on to the next person. Are there things on here you don't understand yet, and you'd like me to further explain? They did such an excellent job, we have no question. Going once. Going twice. Now, you still have an email address, right? You can send it. But first start with your own pastor. Not with them. So for the record, I was here, I don't know, when was I here, Randy? 2 months ago, and I met in this building with the pastors from this region, from here down to Hot Springs, somebody's son, all the way over to the wall, and we talked about it. And they said, let's do this, and do it this way. And that's great, so that's why we did this today. If you want more, they go to Zion or someplace like that, just pick on those two. I'd be glad to come back there. You know, if you want to do more people that way. But on the other hand, my hope is you could take this and give it to somebody. There are more documents that go with this that I've given to the pastors already. And more rationale and more thought. Right, you guys got them?
Where is it, the question?
I've been busy becoming a doctor, so I just don't care. Randy, you? I'm not sure we got it. Oh, we didn't? Oh, well, that can't. The goal is that next year, in January, we put on a Lenten series, so pastors who want a Lenten series all put together can come and we'll talk about it. So next year's Lenten series is entitled How to Live and How to Die. And so that'll all be done, and it's actually pretty well done now. And so a whole series on Lent, and we did it at Brookings last year, where we look at the text about Jesus' time, but then we go through the life and talk all this through. So that's the next step coming to the district. Going once again. Are we good? No. Because what have we not done yet? All right. Dear Father in heaven, you are the one in control, and we are thankful for that. Sometimes we forget the order of things and we think we matter, but we don't. You're the one who matters. We're just thankful that you think we matter, that you sent your Son to die for us, and that we are forgiven and have life in His name, and you care about us so deeply and watch over us each day. Help us to do what you want us to do, because you've done all for us. Help us to both live and to die seeking your will always, and seeking to do the things that you've called us to do. Be with us as individuals, be with us as families. Help us to focus on eternity and the good news that we're with you forevermore. Be with us as a congregation and as congregations. Help us to find ways to care for our neighbors throughout their lives, but including in their last hours. Give us the desire, give us the will to really care about those around us, that they may also know you and be with you forevermore. Help us to be like your Son, to be the one who's looking out for everyone, the one who came not to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. Watch over all of us as we travel, keep us safe as we go home. Help us to rise again tomorrow to give you thanks and praise as we come together and worship. All this we ask in the name of your Son, our Savior, Jesus.
And Spearfish talk about estate planning perspective. And following him will be Tom Muckle from Fiddler Iceberg to talk about funerals from the side, especially of what happens when somebody dies and what do you do and what's it like from their side. And then the third panel is Randy Wampold from Kirk Funeral Home in Rapid City, talking about pre-planning especially and that sort of thing. And so then we'll have 15 minutes roughly from each one of them, and then time for questions for the panel as well. So, Eric, would you like to go on?
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so this is not the best. It just falls off almost, yeah. I'm a lawyer. I do estate planning as a job. I've got 15 minutes. I give a lot of these talks, and I'm going to crowdsource a little bit here. I do this two ways. One, I can give about a 10-minute rundown on just background, or two, I can just answer quick questions. So, do you care? Okay, let me give you the rundown. So I was just looking through the presentation he gave, and he did a very nice job of setting the philosophical groundings. And so I'm going to come in and talk very procedurally here. And there really are three things that everybody needs to worry about when it comes from an estate planning perspective. You need to worry about what happens if I'm still alive but don't have capacity, what happens at that moment of death, and what happens after I die. So, step one, everybody in this room should have some type of power of attorney. And what that is that's an agency designation document that says if I lose mental capacity, I name somebody to step into my shoes to make those decisions. Everybody should have one. I don't care what you work. I don't care what you have. And that's because if you don't have one and you lose your capacity, we have to stop everything and go to court and get a guardianship and a conservatorship. It's a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of pain. So now, depending on the complexity of your estate, I may advise we're going to go right, we're going to do a living trust. If we do, that's going to kind of take over for the power of attorney. But the easy way to remember is everybody needs to have one, period. The second step is that moment of death. And I see there was some discussion on that from a bioethics standpoint. My job isn't to get into that. My job is to talk about the law. And what the law is this. In the state of South Dakota and the state of Wyoming where I practice, you have the right to, in writing, say, if I am in a persistent vegetative state, I'm in a coma, never going to wake up, never going to get better, and my attending physician says that I will die if I am taken off life support, you can direct that they take you off life support. It's not assisted suicide, it's nothing like that, it's not euthanasia. All you're saying is, if I will die but for the machines, get rid of the machines. That is usually called a living will. It's similar to, but not the same as, a DNR. I let the doctors take care of that. Everybody should have a living will. You may not want the plug pulled. If so, you need to have it written down so people know. Because the way it works is doctors have to keep you alive as long as they possibly can, unless you tell them otherwise. So everybody should have that too. Everybody should have a living will. Everybody should have a power of attorney. Depending on what lawyer you're working with, sometimes there's a third document, which is a health care power of attorney, which deals with health care decisions if you're incapacitated. I combine that with my living will, so I just have two. But you need to have all of them. So that gets you up to the moment of death. Now you're dead. Now what? That's most of what I do. Most of what I do is now you're dead. So the will is the most common approach to it. And what a will is, technically, is a list of instructions. It says, when I die, do this. And there's a whole chapter in the code that directs how that happens. But the most important thing to remember is that's all a will does. There's a lot of misapprehension out here that if I have a will, when I die, everything's going to get taken care of and I don't have to worry about it. If you have a will, there's going to be probate. And what probate is it's a legal action to distribute the assets pursuant to the will. The will make sure it happens, but there's extra steps after you die. I do probates all the time. They're not hard, but they're somewhat expensive and they're somewhat time-consuming. So there are options. The most common option is to do a will. Everybody should have one, but also use what are called non-probate transfers. And everybody in this room has one. I can guarantee you. If you own a bank account with somebody else and you die, they own a bank account. Doesn't go through the will. If you own your house with your spouse and it's owned what's called joint tenancy, and you die, your spouse gets the house. Doesn't go through the will. If you have an IRA, or if you have life insurance, and you filled out a form with the company that says, when I die, pay my IRA to my wife, that'll go right to your wife. That won't go through your will. So because of this, when I have a couple and the first spouse dies, often there isn't much to do because everything will automatically move to that spouse. So some people use that and they try to get everything they possibly can in those non-probate transfers so as little as possible goes through the will and we keep probate down. It's an absolutely valid approach. People do it every day. Then, the next level of complexity is, like I mentioned, a trust. And I would give a trust to everybody in this room if I could. Because trusts are better in every way, shape, or form. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. The problem is trusts are way more expensive than we do. My trust costs about 7 times as much as my wills cost, and I think they're worth every penny. Because if you do a trust and you've done it right, there's no probate. And anybody here who's been through probate knows how time-consuming it is. So I'm a big proponent of trusts, but for a lot of people, they're overkill. If all you have is a house, money in the bank, a car, and your retirement, generally I can do everything with just a will and maybe some non-probate transfers. But trusts are very important, and they're getting more important every day because a will doesn't do you any good until you're dead. Whereas a trust starts immediately. And it allows for disability planning that's a lot more flexible and streamlined than what I can do with a power of attorney. But always start. If you don't have anything, I don't care who you go to, go to a lawyer, at the very least have power of attorney and a living will. You've got to have those. Everybody should have a will, but if you don't have a will, it's not all going to go to the state. It'll go to whomever your closest living relatives are, but you can't name them. So you should probably have a will too. Okay, that's my 7-minute spiel. Questions?
Is it okay to download a form off the internet for a durable power of attorney?
It's better than nothing. I could tell you stories about people who do it and do it wrong and make me a lot of money. So, but it's better than nothing. You know, if you don't have the time, if you don't have the money, download something, sign it. It's better than nothing, but the problem is some of those forms are not special for South Dakota law. Some of those forms aren't signed the right way, and I'll give you a perfect example. If you sign a power of attorney online, and it isn't notarized, I can't use that document to do anything with real estate. Because in order for an agent under power of attorney to deal with real estate, it's got to be notarized and recorded. And I could give you all kinds of examples of where, again, it's better than nothing, but I charge like $75 for a power of attorney. They aren't expensive. And I'd much rather you go to a lawyer to get it done. Other questions?
Can you have something stipulated in your will, just saying that you leave everything to the discretion of your kids to distribute?
You could. I mean, the problem with that is you're really putting a lot of pressure on your kids.
Well, and like certain things would be.
Okay. What we often do, for instance, is my average client has 3 kids. And it says, I leave everything equally to my kids. What that really means is each of them gets equal value. It's not like each of them gets an equal third of everything. And then if you name all 3 of your kids as your executor, they have to figure out how to split it. But when all is said and done, it's got to be equal third. If you just say, give everything as this guy designates, what you're really doing is you're locking it in his estate, and that's not good for his taxes. So there's a point where you don't want it to be too big. But again, everybody's different. There's no such thing as a boilerplate will, because everybody's a little bit different. But I've had people want that, and I've talked them out of it. I have. Oh, sorry, quick.
Does South Dakota have estate tax?
We don't now. We had it until the mid-90s. If it's a state level, it's usually called an inheritance tax. South Dakota doesn't have it. There's the federal, which we're going to be stuck with, but nothing in state.
Once you've established one or all 3 of those documents, how frequently do you go back and review them?
I say 5 years. Yeah, and it's there's been huge changes in the law the last 2 years, but my documents haven't. They still keep up with it, but I'd say 5, just to be safe.
I have a will that was written in North Dakota. I know it's still valid.
Sure.
Would there be any reason to look it over because of
Yes.
South Dakota?
If you change states, it's always good to have a lawyer take a look at it. Now, North Dakota law and South Dakota law is very similar. So I have lots of North Dakota clients who come into me. Sometimes I make changes, sometimes I don't. But strictly because my bigger concern is honestly with your power of attorney and your living will. Because we have, South Dakota has different law with those. But yeah, if you change states, I'd always have somebody to take a look at it. Make sure that they're updated.
Dependents are accommodated for in wills, is that correct?
Well,
Dependents
are,
so whether they're accommodated for in wills?
well, you have to be careful because it's, from a legal standpoint, your heirs, the people who will inherit from you if you don't have a will, are generally blood relations. So if you have a dependent who's, say, a stepchild, they wouldn't automatically be cared for. So then it's extra important to have that in your will. Because you can, in your will, you can provide for anybody you want. And it doesn't have to be blood relations. I mean, these days, family is it's a term that doesn't have the same meaning for the same people. So you have to be careful, especially for that.
So is it also where, if you have younger children, you would stipulate so-and-so would take care of them or something? Okay. What about, at what age does that end?
Well, 18. So the way it works
It's
is,
not just if they're remaining dependent, it would be at the age.
at age 18, a person becomes legally an adult. So there's two separate considerations here. The first one is who's actually taking care of them. That'd be the guardian. And in your will, you designate who's the guardian for your kids, who's raising them until they hit 18. Then the question is, what do you do with their stuff? And in my documents, generally, I have a trust within either a will or a sub-trust within a trust, and I usually lock that up till about age 30. Because an 18-year-old probably, they may be ready to go off on their own, but they probably aren't ready to get all their parents' money. So what you can have is you can have a guardian till 18, but you can have their assets in trust till age, I used to 30. And the money's available to them, but you have somebody, a friend, a bank, act as the trustee to hand that money out as needed. And so you can deal with those as two separate things. You can have a separate person named as trustee and as guardian. I have time for two more questions. Yes, sir.
So Schedule A is associated with the trust,
Mhm.
and it kind of talks about the disposition of things. So if one member of the two couples buys and sells a lot of cars and stuff, no, I'm not. So you don't title it in irrevocable trust every time, can you still just specify on Schedule A and how it
No,
works?
what that Schedule A does is that just says what is in the trust at the moment you sign it. And so if you get a new asset or sell asset afterwards, you have to make sure it's titled in the trust. Now, if it's untitled, I don't care, because it's untitled. But if you get a new vehicle, buy a new piece of property, so on, it needs to be titled in the trust. Just being on the Schedule A doesn't guarantee that it's actually in the trust. One more. Yes, sir?
Yeah, we got our living wills, and my wife and daughter, and our son. But right now, our son is not capable of making any decisions.
Sure.
And I was wondering, do we have to come to you to get that taken off, or can we just cross his name off?
Well, I'd always prefer you come to me.
Well, I'm sure you do.
But no. But if you have, most documents say, if I can't do it, this person, if they can't do it, this person, and so on.
Yeah.
So if you cross it out, that may or may not work. But here's the thing, if this person physically or mentally can't do it, they'll just be skipped over anyway. But if you don't want them, I'd much rather you come to me and us to do a new one, so there's no questions about it. Because crossing it out, depending on the document, who does it, how it's done, may or may not work. Okay, well, Tom, I'm cutting into your time, so come on up. I'll have more time afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Also, when we're getting to the funeral side, we do have some of these books available. It's called Final Victory, Contemplating the Death and Funeral of a Christian by Pastor Brian Wolfmiller, an LCMS pastor. We have some of those copies available. Pastor Sturzberger brought those. They're $10 a piece, so you can pay him if you'd like to have one. They're on the table back by the curtain. Oh.
A little shaky, I don't talk in front of a lot of people. Good morning, this is quite a turnout. Susie, a couple of years in a row, you kind of helped put together this presentation here a few years ago, 3-4 years ago, and we had good turnouts today. We had an excellent turnout. Kind of a brief little history talking about death. I started out as an undersheriff up in Weagle, Montana, Weagle County. That was my first time of being involved, being around where death was. 1986, I was appointed deputy county coroner in Weagle County. served in that position, and then 10 years later went to Fallon County, Baker, Montana. Down there, served as a deputy county coroner down there. I served under the funeral director, was the county coroner. Upon his leaving Baker and moving to Dickinson to expand his business, they turned it into, they made the position, instead of an individual county coroner, they made it sheriff coroner. So my sheriff was the county coroner, I was his deputy. I've been involved with death care ever since then. In 2016, my wife and I moved to Spearfish here, continued on with funeral service here, and to this day I continue to serve as a deputy county coroner for Lawrence County under County Coroner Pat Fahey. Death is different. No two people will have the same feelings, experience it the same as everybody else. With death comes a lot of different stages of grief and what we go through. I can tell you that the people I have been around, either as a deputy county coroner or as a licensed funeral director, death is more, I'm trying to find a good word to put this in, people that have a good Christian background accept death a lot easier. People who have no faith, who have no understanding, they can't accept it. And it's kind of, it's sad to see, but I do witness that. Different deaths that we deal with, as a county coroner, anytime that death occurs where they have not been under the care of a physician for, I believe it's 24 hours, that death goes back to the county coroner for investigation. Here in South Dakota and in Lawrence County specifically, when a death occurs at a home or someplace other than a medical facility where a doctor's in charge, the county coroner is summoned to the scene. So is law enforcement, the jurisdiction that death occurs in, whether it's the city police or the county sheriff's office. And that's a good deal, because they have to go in, make sure everything is as it is, and they work hand in hand with the county coroner. Once that's taken care of, it's the county coroner's duty to find out how this person came to their death, and most of the time it's a medical issue, is what it is. We rely on medical history from previous physicians that have been in contact with this person, and that's where we come up with our findings and facts. Sometimes we don't have that ability, so we have to do a medical examination, which is a nice word for an autopsy. And that, under state law, I mean, it's the county coroner has the right to call for an autopsy, so, and we've done that. Kind of in some of the other outlying communities that we work with, we do have a funeral home over in Sundance, Wyoming. We work with Crook County there, county coroner there, and with the Crook County Sheriff's Office. So things are kind of, that's how it works. When somebody is found deceased at their home and they're not under a doctor's care or whatnot, what needs to be done is 911 needs to be notified. And what they're going to do is they're going to take and send EMS there to make sure that the person is deceased. They're also going to send law enforcement there to make sure that, too, for that. Here in Lawrence County, particularly in the Northern Hills region, we're blessed to have the hospice people that we have. Up in Baker, Montana, we didn't have that. If you had to go into, if your family couldn't keep up with you, if you had a illness that was, that you were not going to recover from, cancer, things like that, you're either the family took care of you at home until your dying days, or you went to the nursing home, a nursing home setting. Hospice and comfort care come into the home and work with the family to help provide, help them kind of get some skills put in place to help take care of their loved ones. We do have the hospice house, the Monument Hospice House over in Rapid City. I don't know if anybody's been in there. I've been in there several times. And it is a fabulous place. It's a holy place is what it is. And so we're pretty fortunate to have those types of things available to us to help us. Kind of one of the things that we hospice is pretty good about is kind of sitting down and talking with the families because as Pastor mentioned earlier, when you're on hospice, you don't graduate from that back into normal life. I mean, that is the end of life care. And so hospice is going to talk to you about different things, kind of help you kind of plan what's coming down the road for when that time does come. I think I've kind of hit on that. One of the other questions was, as a funeral director, you know, we get all kinds of different requests, different things like that. We do a lot of pre-planning, and with that, we know when a person's time has come, when they pass, what they want for the type of service and things like that. We're in a very high-rate cremation area here in Spearfish and in the Northern Hills. And I think, you know, when it comes down to traditional funeral costs versus cremation costs, it does come down to cost. What it costs to do the same thing in the end. I know some churches, Catholic Church, is that with cremation is that the body, if you're cremated, the body stays in whole. They are pretty opposed to the fact of splitting up cremains, scattering cremains, things like that. They want them buried and everything kept together. But like I say, we get hit with a lot of different things like that. I used to have an idea about cremation, my own personal preference on that. I'm not going to share it with a few people here. I think Pastor and I have talked about it. But you know, it's each to their own. I mean, it's something, if you're all right with it, that's fine. If not, then don't do it. I think in the end, my thing is that no matter what you do, is that you need to come into the church for one last service when you're dead. And whether, however big the box per se is, whether it's a casket or a burner, I believe that that's important. And I'm not a real scattering person. I believe in a cemetery plot because you do have a place you need to go and visit to know that your loved one is there. Any questions? I'm not going to ask how I did because I don't want to get Yes?
Is the cost of cremation like half of a funeral? Or half of what a funeral could be? Or is it less than that even?
I sat down this morning, my morning started at 4:30 this morning on a death call. I had another one at 5:30, so when I got back and I had to take a shower and I did some figuring. I put together some figures here for our funeral home here in Spearfish, and of course we can cover the Lee Deadwood area and Sundance. And I took our service charges in our least expensive entry-level steel casket. Okay? And I've also added on there, if you look at whether it's two cemeteries in Sundance, the Spearfish Cemetery, or the Oak Ridge at Deadwood or Lee, you are required to buy a vault if you're going to bury a casket. So I took the least expensive vault that we have, the printed materials, the register book, things like that, and open and closing of a grave. And that price that I took from that, and then I put together the same with our cost for doing a cremation followed by a memorial service, and the printed materials, and opening and closing of the grave for an urn. And it's a little over half price of a cremation is of a casket burial. So that's what people look at. I mean, it comes down to, some people don't have a lot of money, and some people, they don't want,
He said it's half the price.
they don't want the big, I don't know, I mean, expensive of a full casket funeral. As a funeral home, I mean, we're here to meet the needs of every family that comes in that door, and we meet the needs of every belief that there is. I mean, I've done a service for atheists before. Is it fun? No, it isn't. But we take care of every faith there is. Yeah.
I was going to say, so many times I hear people say, but I'd much rather not be cremated, but it's a financial thing. Why can't our churches start up memorial funds and kind of help some of the less fortunate people that feel that they can't afford the funeral? I mean, just so that they don't have to be cremated if they don't want to be, you know? And with the insurance plans nowadays, you can pay a part of it on an ongoing basis. You know, so I don't see why everyone is talking about it being a financial thing.
Yeah. I think when it comes down to it, I think a lot of it is people kind of have in their mind what they really want to do and proceed with it. So, because I've met with some people since I've been here, and you know, they had some really good questions. I had a family I met with on 2 different occasions within a week of each other, and they came back with good questions and everything. But when they made their decision, it was a sound decision that they made, not just with themselves, but with their family as well.
Can you go and, I have plenty of years ahead of me, but could I go into detail what I want and pick out what I want, even though those things would probably change in the next 20 years? And would that cost change then if I were to pay for it up front?
I think we got another gentleman's going to be talking about pre-planning here.
Gotcha. Thank you.
With that, kind of get into that, but you know, the pre-plans that we do, I mean, anybody can do a pre-plan, and the only thing I can tell you is that if you have the money that you can put down, the younger you are, the better you're going to make out on it. But the thing is you have to remember is that, you know, when you pick out different, we call it merchandise or casket, you know, burial vaults are all, they never change. A lot of caskets, I mean, I'm selling caskets that have been, that our casket company has been making since probably back in the early 50s. Some of that stuff doesn't change, you know.
So, I got an elderly mother that's done all the pre-planning and went in and bought a prepaid funeral. What's your view on that?
I'm going to kind of go back to what Pastor talked about earlier, and I've told every person I've sat down with, there's some in here that I've done pre-plans with at our funeral home here. When you do put together a pre-plan, not only put together the plan, but prepay, you have given your family the greatest gift you can give them. And given yourself the greatest peace of mind, because you know that when that time comes, everything's put together. You know, we may have to do a little, you know, housekeeping kind of, especially with an obituary, things like that, you know, to keep brain update. But when you've paid for it and you've got it all planned out, you've given a good gift. Really have.
If a person has life insurance, do y'all contact them and work through them for the finances?
What we do
does
is,
the family do that?
we can, at the time of need, we can meet with them, and, or even before then, we can do what's called an assignment with that insurance company, so when that person does pass, or if they have passed, you know, we can take and do an assignment where the funeral home is paid, and then the residual goes back to the estate, you know.
Have you noticed these early-ish or rise in cremations due to COVID, family not being able to get back, those kinds of things?
You know, we had, at the start of COVID last year, we had families that chose to do cremation, a direct cremation, and then do a celebration or memorial service later on. And I think that's where cremation has kind of become really popular. I'm going to kind of jump around the rabbit hole here a little bit. Is that typically back in the day when a person died, you know, usually you had a funeral, something took place within 3-4 days, and that was it. Families today, when kids graduate from school, they're gone. I mean, they're wherever they go, and they set up their roots and everything. And we're finding now that why cremation has become popular is because, you know, now you can kind of schedule when you want to do that memorial service and bring a conclusion to it. Is it healthy? Probably not. I mean, because you still, every person is gonna go through the stages of grief. And the longer you kind of drag it out, so to speak, the harder it is. But it's kind of became a way of convenience. But we did see a spike in our cremation last year with COVID, but, you know, we've seen our cremation figure numbers go up over the past year, even before that.
Maybe one more question.
Oh, I realize the sky's the limit on those numbers you have in your pocket, but can you tell us what that is? What your comparison? I mean, you could go really crazy with a casket and an urn, I suppose.
You know, I can tell you our casket price ranges range from $1,895 up to $9,300.
Okay.
Funeral home, there's funeral homes out there, you get up north, and that's where I worked at up there. I mean, you know, we're talking, our casket that here, that's $9,300. When I left the funeral home I was in, back in 2013, that same casket was selling for right at $13,000.
Dig a hole straight there.
Yeah, so we'll have time for questions at the end. I want to have time for our last presenter here this morning. Thank you, Tom. So then Randy Wambold is here to talk about pre-planning. And again, the last 15 minutes or so, we'll have time to ask the panel any more questions you might have.
Thank you. Those guys are amazing. I mean, they stood up here without notes. I've got notes. The good thing is I did dress myself today. I am with Kirk Funeral Home, and I do the pre-planning of that. So some of those questions that you guys had, I do the pre-planning part. One of the big things is, you know, why to pre-plan? Cost was one. When we do pre-plan and pre-pay, I think somebody had a question on prepaying. It does lock in the prices. Guaranteed is a very, very big word nowadays with inflation costs. So that's a really good reason to pre-plan. Who pre-plans? Statistically, wives bring the husbands in. I'm just saying, guys, we don't like to discuss this. The wives do. And thank goodness for our wives, right? So, I think the funeral, what's your name? Tom. Tom brought up, you know, one of the main reasons for pre-planning was the memorial service or the funeral service. I can't tell you how huge that is to the other family. When I meet with families, it's a lot less emotion. We joke, we laugh, we have fun. When, you know, Tom, when he meets with families, a lot more emotion is involved. It's our loved one that we won't see again. We'll be reunited, but we won't physically see them here on earth again. So the path that we take for the service is huge. You know, Tom was talking about the cremation and all that stuff, and there's definitely price differences. We can do what's called direct cremation. That's, you know, pretty much in a box and back in a box, which is quite inexpensive. But we have to think about those vehicles, especially in the Christian community, on, you know, the memorial service, the funeral service. How are we honoring this family? So the funeral directors do an amazing job with all of the emotion that's involved. I heard one funeral director say he's almost a counselor at some of these. You know, you have two sisters that haven't seen each other for 10 years and suddenly mom's gone. Well, one sister wants to, you know, put the hammer down and the other sister's like, I'm out, you know, or brothers, whatever it is. So there's a lot of emotion involved at the time. So when he talked about it being, you know, one of those gifts to give your family, consider, the pre-planning part as a gift. As you can tell, I'm nervous, so I don't speak in front of all y'all very often, so. Another thing that I want to touch base on is if we have some folks that are elderly, possibly going on Title 19, there's a spend down, and the funeral service is a qualified spend down for Title 19, for the Medicaid purposes. So the state recently increased that from 10,000 service up to a 15,000 that you can actually spend down. And that includes the cost of the services of a funeral home and also cost of associated services. The services of clergy to be at, a service. They do get an honorarium. Very important. Huge job that these guys do. Cost of the opening and closing of the grave. Cost of the grave site. Cost of a luncheon. All of these costs are associated with a funeral. With pre-planning, the good news is you can take care of that with a plan. And depending upon, the particular situations and stuff, we take care of that. I basically take care of it with 3 different ways. I can do a CD. We purchase a CD on behalf of you. It's in a bank, safe, secure, not in my pocket. That's a good thing. We can do it with a trust, a guaranteed trust, or I'm a licensed insurance agent. The best way, I believe, the most consumer-friendly way, is with an insurance product. And that will actually guarantee today's prices 20 years down the road. So for the services that the funeral home does, your family doesn't have to pay anything 20 years down the road. Huge gift for your family. I think somebody brought up the plans, and I know you guys have plans here for services, and I know Pastor Randy does too. Those are fantastic. The plans for your funeral home, if you have your plans there, they gather a lot of different information. The plans of the church designate your wishes for the Christian burial, the Christian funeral. The plans that we have designate emergency contacts, social security number for the death certificate, mother's full maiden name, father's name, where you were born, things like that. Information that when you're meeting with a funeral director, when you're meeting with your pastor, that might be hard information to get. So we can actually do what's called a record guide that you guys can have in a set place, your funeral home of choice, that lists all of your wishes. And it can be updated. So, I don't even know what time it is. Where were they looking already? Do I have like 45 minutes? No. 5 minutes. Nothing like that. The other thing I want to touch base on is we all hear, I'm going to live to be 100. I want to be 114. Not anymore, because I creep into grown right now. But we don't know when something's going to happen. We don't know if our spouse is going to be here. We don't know if our kids are going to remember where the documents were. Unexpected things happen, point blank. Having your plans down, having an association with the network that you have. I mean, you have pastors here. phenomenal. You have a funeral director here, phenomenal. You have an estate planner here, phenomenal. Be sure to network with these people to have your particular plan put into place, have your wishes expressed, so that these guys can honor your wishes. It's pretty hard for a pastor to do a funeral service for those that they don't know. It's pretty hard for kids that are spread out to know, what mom and dad want. One of the examples of Pastor Reinerson's in there was the 4 boys, I'm one, but they didn't know mom's wishes. Have it written down some way, some form, somehow. So, anyway, any questions? Oh, okay, I was hoping that was yes.
If you buy a prepaid plan and you go toes up in Louisiana, how do they know to toast you there and bring you home?
Good question. It's a good question. What we do with our pre-planners, those that pre-plan with us, is we do give them a card from the funeral home. That's the first call to make. We have a book, right, a very thick book that has funeral homes, funeral directors all over the country. You guys probably don't have that book, I'm guessing. So call the funeral home first, where your plan is. They have the plan, they'll handle it. If there's associated costs, we're required by the Federal Trade Commission to list everything out. So that's what I have to do that. I have to list everything out. This is what you're being charged for. So call the funeral home first. They'll take care of it. They have your plan. So good question. Yes?
What does pre-plan consist of? And can it be put on payments for over years before?
Yeah. I work with just one insurance company. There's a couple of them out there that'll do the same thing. The one that I work with only does this, funeral pre-plans. And there's 3 years or 5-year plans. Now, because it's an insurance product, there are some limitations, some rules, guidelines, what have you. But yeah, we can definitely work with that. We can have direct bill, check-o-matic, whatever. So yeah, I'd like to get your plan first, not, people that come, we're all shoppers, right? Okay, give me your cheapest price, I want that. In funeral, that's not always the best. It's not always the best way to honor the families. So, yeah, we do have those options of payment plans, things like that.
What's in a payment plan? What is in the payment besides just the money? Finances. What do you do exactly? Because we've heard about other kind of plans today.
Right.
Yeah.
So you pick out a plan, you come in, you pre-plan, and you say, this is what I want, A, B, C, D, E. And then we have a price point. So, and this is in my realm, if we had a cremation followed by a memorial service, it's right around that $5,000 mark, just under that $5,000 mark, with government taxes, because we have to pay them. If we do a 3-year plan on that, or a 5-year plan on that, because it's an insurance company, the least expensive way is to pay it up front. The more expensive way is to drag it out that 3 or 5 years, because they do charge interest. Good news is they do pay dividends too. So it's kind of a tit for tat on that. But we can do plans. To get specifics, it's kind of hard up here, but they do plans, yeah. Yes?
Wouldn't, for this lady's question, just travel projection, right?
Right.
I work for a and pay funeral homes all day long. That's all I do.
Okay, so travel protection?
She would pay for travel protection, so if she died in Tennessee,
Oh.
they would just bring her back to South Dakota.
Right. Cremated remains actually can be mailed.
Right, travel protection.
Right.
They would bring her back.
Right, yeah. And that can all be part of the plan that you have. So, yes.
So also to answer that question, you call a funeral home with your plan. That director finds a funeral home in the area you passed. And they make the arrangements to get you back here, whether it's cremated or whether it's flying you back here.
This is why we need wives, not that she's my wife, but our wives are always smarter than us guys. Didn't Esther and Anderson say that earlier? Yeah. So, any other questions? Yes?
You have a card that you carry with you that has all the information on it.
Correct. When I do a plan, for somebody, I do give them a card to call the funeral home first. Tom, I'm sure you have cards that they call the funeral home.
One of the main things we really stress to people when they do pre-plan like that, they do get a card, but we tell them, first and foremost, share this with your children, what you
Yes.
have done and what you have. And to remember, as you said, when that happens, call the funeral home that you set the pre-plan up with. Do not let, we've had this happen down south where they're said, well, we'll just call this one. You know, and it's not a good deal. Call the funeral home that you met with and dealt with. We'll take care of the rest of it.
I would like, at this time, to open up the questions for anybody on the panel, the last little bit here. For Randy or for Tom or for Harry.
Yes, is this for Randy or Tom or Eric?
Randy.
Oh, for Randy, okay.
And I think I know the answer, but for the rest of you, if you would happen to move and live in Arizona or wherever, and want to have your funeral down there, but your plan is here, how does that work?
Good question. With the insurance policies, and again, I'm only talking on the ones that I do, they are what's called transferable. The plans that we use, they number one guarantee the price, like I said, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. Because again, it's God's plan when we go, right? But they are transferable, payable by a death certificate. So you can't come back in 3 years and say, hey, I want to buy a boat. That's not happening. But your plan is paid for, or that money can be transferred to another state if you do move. So Arizona would be really nice, by the way. Yes.
On that topic, if you move and you want to be buried here in South Dakota, but you died in Nevada, but you don't want to be cremated, aren't there like costs per state to travel that body?
When we have to list all of this out, and one of those things is transference of body from another state. Airfare is involved. We have the size of the plane to take, a casket. You have, transportation costs. If they, like right now in the wintertime, we can only drive into Denver, right? The plane's flying to Denver.
Denver, once in a while,
Billings, yeah. So we'd have to have somebody drive it back here. We're talking about an embalmed body casketed. So you can plan that, but we don't know, right? So that's always a charge that could be, I'm assuming, added on at the time, but it'll always be listed out as a requirement. So, yes?
This may be in the weeds, but do we ever allow for family members to, or friends, close to transport a body, to assume responsibility?
I'm gonna, this would be a Tom question. She asked, okay, yeah.
You can if you have, we've had this happen a couple of times here just lately, where a family member died in Colorado, we had one in Texas last year and whatnot, and to save that expense, now we're talking when they come back, they're embalmed, and they have to be for that conveyance like that. They're brought, family members picked them up at that funeral home that we scheduled that at, and then brought them up to us. We just sent one from here to Missouri here last month, So you can, it's safe, but you know, it does save money, because you're talking flying human remains, I mean, kind of on the average, you're looking at right around that, just the flight itself is right around could be $650 to $900.
Yeah.
Plus you gotta pay the funeral home, we have to pay them to go take that deceased to the airport, wherever their nearest airport is, then we have to go either Billings or to Denver and get them.
But you have to have a permit or a license as a non-funeral home type person to transport a body, correct?
Anybody that comes out of another state or goes there has what we call burial transit permit, so it's a transportation permit. Whether we fly it or the family brings it, it still has that.
But one permit's good for any state, or multiple states?
Yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't make no difference how many states you go through, if you get stopped for speeding and they ask, what in the world you got here? You don't have
How does organ donation work as far as time-wise and all that?
Organ donation, that is typically done through the hospital setting, and then the funeral home will get the call. So organ donation is done prior to the funeral home getting a call.
Does it make any difference as time-wise?
It has to be done pretty much immediately. We do a lot with Dakota Lions Eye Bank. Folks that have leftover eyeglasses or whatnot, that is a gift to give. But anyway, with when you talk like eye enucleation, corneas, whatnot, I mean, that has to be done. We just did one here the other night. That's got to be done within 12 hours. Do organ harvest, long bone, skin, things like that. That has to be done. I mean, they don't leave the hospital setting for that. In Wyoming, we have a transport company that comes up to the hospital in Sundance and takes them down to Aurora to do that and then brings them back to the funeral home. The other thing to kind of caution you on that, when you do that, it is a gift. But you have to remember the procedure is very invasive, what they're doing. Because they're taking skin where they can get it, and a lot of times it's here. And for those of you who want to have a traditional funeral with viewing, visitation, you need to talk to your funeral directors and ask them what their thoughts are on that. Because, the donation centers will tell you that, it doesn't affect viewing and whatnot, but I'm telling you, once you do that procedure, your timeline is very short from the time you get them back to when you get them to a cemetery. We had a case here, it was not our funeral home, it was another funeral home in the area. I'm friends with the director on that went through that. My understanding was the person had a donor thing on their driver's license. This person died in the ER in a local hospital, it was Spearfish Hospital. And when the donor alliance was done and the funeral director went to get the deceased gentleman, and the wife and the children and grandchildren are expecting to have a viewing visitation, things changed awful quick. And it was a bad situation. It is a gift to give. If you're going to be cremated immediately, if that's your wishes, do that. If you can, if you can be accepted for harvest, and what's going to be is like your long bones, the bones, and skin. Go for it. But you have to really, if you're looking at doing, mom dies today, and we're looking at doing a service in a couple of weeks, a traditional funeral, no, let's not do it. Because once the heart quits beating, the time clock starts working against us as a funeral director. God is God, we don't come close to that at all. And in certain times, certain conditions, how a person dies, kind of dictates how good we can do our job for the family in the end.
Yes.
I have a question, maybe it's kind of legal too. Since I work for an insurance company and I pay funeral homes all day long, that's all I do after people die, do you guys prefer the policies to be revocable or irrevocably assigned to funeral homes or individuals?
Good question. I only deal with irrevocable insurance policies or CDs or trusts. Eric, do you have,
Well, if I'm the funeral home, I don't want it to be revoked.
right,
I'll tell you this, for you to get the Medicaid deduction, it's gotta be irrevocable. So most people do it irrevocable. I think that's better for all parties.
and I think another question, what does that mean? Being able to revoke it, like, I'm in charge of my own insurance policy, I'm the owner. On an irrevocable insurance policy, the funeral home would be the owner of that policy, payable to the funeral home for the benefit of Mr. or Mrs. Well. So I don't know where that was, but did that answer your question?
Means you can't go by the vote.
Can't go by the vote. Yeah.
So what is the other word? You were talking about irrevocable and revocable.
And revocable. So
And what's the other one? Revocable.
revocable is if I'm the owner of my insurance policy, I can go take a loan out on it. I can change the name of the beneficiary. I'm the owner, I'm the policy holder, the owner. I can make the changes. When a funeral home owns it, on the irrevocable part, it's not changeable and it takes it out of the Medicaid spend down. It qualifies for the Medicaid spend down system.
What happens if something happens to the beneficiary though?
Then a death certificate would be given to the funeral home and then the monies would be paid. So, yes?
We had to transfer my mother from one nursing home to the other just right when she ran out of money, and we put her on Medicaid. She had I think it was $10,000 policy that we were either going to have to cash in because it was an asset or assign it to somebody.
Right.
So we assigned it to the funeral home.
Well, and that's why I say if it's not irrevocably assigned, it counts as an asset for Medicaid. So that's, you can have it revocable if they'll do it, but if the reason you're doing it is for Title 19 planning, it's not going to help.
And the thing with putting it in as that irrevocable trust into the nursing home, or into the funeral home, if the funeral you wanted costs $15,000 and there's $30,000 in her trust with the funeral home, you get that $15,000 back, and it circumvents paying inheritance tax on it too. That's
yeah,
my funeral
yeah,
director.
I think it was that
Yeah.
with other.
This was from the funeral director. We have prepaid set up. Yeah. It's going to depend on your nursing or your funeral home too.
Maybe one more question.
Oh, yes, okay. I'm up here praying that there's no more questions.
Doesn't each stage have a certain amount that you can set aside for it if you know that if you have to go to the hospital, a nursing home, that they can't use that money?
It's Eric, if I'm misspeaking, please correct me, but that's the Medicaid, the Title 19 part.
That's it.
South Dakota just changed theirs from 10,000 to 15,000 just 3 months ago, something like that.
Very small.
Colorado, it's unlimited. There's no, yeah.
I gotta go, but one thing, and I don't work for him, but everybody needs to go do this. I'm a big, as an estate planner, I love pre-planning because it makes my life easier, it makes my representatives' lives easier, and the inflation thing is such a huge deal. If you can lock it in, and then also, as we've been talking about with the Title 19, as the first thing I advise people to do when they're spending down is go pre-plan. As far as I'm concerned, everybody over 50 or 60 should just have a pre-paid plan in place, funded plan. It makes everybody's life so much easier.
Eric, as my spokesman, has spoken. Thanks, Eric. Thank you. Really.
Good job.
together today as we consider end-of-life decision-making, Christian decision-making at Life Center. We pray to be with us as we serve our families, as we serve those around us, as we, in all things, look to you and to your word and to your cross for our guidance and for our wisdom. Lord, I thank you for our panel and our speakers today. I pray that you give all of us safe travels home and keep us all, Lord, in the faith, looking to you and to your Son, Jesus. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot, great job.